Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I saw it before I realized how quiet everything had gotten. I was driving home late, just after 1 a.m., taking a back road that cuts through a stretch of low farmland. It's not a busy route, just a narrow lane with hedges on both sides and long, flat fields beyond them. No streetlights, just your headlights and whatever they pick up. There was fog, not heavy enough to block everything, but thick enough that it sat low across the road, shifting in uneven patches. You'd drive through one section where it was clear, then suddenly hit a thicker band where the beam from the headlights bounced back at you. I'd slow down a bit because of it. Nothing unusual about that. What stood out was the silence. Even with the windows up, you usually hear something. Wind, the faint hum of tires, distant noise. But at some point, it all seemed to flatten out. Not gone completely, just reduced, like someone had turned everything down a notch. I noticed it, but didn't think much of it. Then the road straightened, and I saw the light. It was ahead of me, maybe 20 or 30 meters down the lane, low to the ground, hovering just above the surface. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Maybe my headlights catching something in the fog, but it didn't behave like that. It wasn't scattered, it was contained. A small, dim glow, sitting just above the road. I eased off the accelerator. The car slowed. The light didn't move, didn't flicker. Just stayed there. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. There was no shape around it, no object, just the glow. The fog around it looked thinner, not gone, just less dense, like the light was pushing it back slightly. I slowed almost to a crawl. My headlights filled the road ahead, but the glow distinct, separate. I remember glancing at the hedges. They were barely moving, no wind. The fog drifted slowly across the fields, but around the light, it seemed to hesitate, like it didn't pass through that spot the same way. I swallowed, felt a slight pressure in my ears. Nothing painful, just noticeable. I looked back at the road. The light was still there, same size, same brightness. I moved the car forward another few meters. The distance between me and it closed. It didn't react, didn't move away, didn't change. I checked the time on the dashboard, 1:07 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up. The light seemed sharper, not brighter, just more defined, like the edges had become clearer. I slowed even more, barely moving now. The fog shifted across the road, a thicker patch rolled through. The light remained visible inside it, unaffected. I felt the pressure in my ears increase slightly. I swallowed again, no change. I gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter. My hands felt colder than they should have. I kept moving forward, slow, careful. The light stayed exactly where it was, just above the road, not touching it, not casting any reflection. That's when I realized it wasn't lighting anything. The surface of the road beneath it looked the same as everywhere else. No shadow, no highlight, just normal. The glow existed without interacting with anything. I stopped the car, engine idling, the headlights fixed on it. I sat there for a few seconds, just watching, waiting for it to do something. It didn't. The silence around me felt heavier now, like the space inside the car had changed slightly. I took a slow breath. The air felt normal, but everything else felt off. I put the car into gear again, moved forward slowly. The light stayed in place until I got within maybe 10 meters. Then it started to fade, not moving, not pulling away, just dimming, evenly. The edges stayed the same, the size stayed the same, it just lost brightness. I kept moving. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. The glow continued to fade, until it was barely visible, just a faint outline in the fog. Then it was gone, no flicker, no movement, just empty road. I drove through the spot where it had been. Nothing happened. No sensation, no change, just normal road under the tires. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me, just the fog and the empty lane. I kept driving, didn't stop, but I kept checking the road ahead, waiting to see it again. It didn't show up. The rest of the drive was normal. The fog thinned out as I got closer to town. The usual sounds came back, the faint hum of distant traffic, the wind, everything how it should be. I got home around 1:20, parked the car, sat there for a minute before getting out, just listening. Everything felt normal again. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep, didn't sleep much. The next day, I drove that same road in daylight. Nothing unusual, just a narrow lane between fields. No marks, no signs of anything. But now, whenever I'm driving at night and there's fog, I slow down more than I need to, and I keep watching the road ahead, just in case that dim light is sitting there again. I noticed it because it didn't stop when I unplugged everything. It started late, just after midnight. I was in the living room half watching something on TV, half scrolling on my phone. Nothing unusual about the night. No wind outside, no rain, just quiet. Then I heard it, a low hum. Not loud, not sharp, just a steady, low-frequency sound like something electrical running in the background. At first, I didn't think much of it. Houses make noise. Fridges, boilers, wiring, there's always something. But this didn't feel like it was coming from a specific place. It felt like it was just there, filling the space. I muted the TV, the hum stayed. I sat there for a second, listening more carefully. It didn't change, didn't rise or fall, just steady. I got up and walked into the kitchen. Fridge was running. I opened it. The hum didn't change. I unplugged it. The fridge clicked off. The hum stayed exactly the same. That's when I paused, because that should have affected it, even a little. I stood there, just listening. The sound didn't get louder or quieter when I moved. It didn't seem directional. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I walked back into the living room. Still there. Same volume, same tone. I turned off the lights. No change. I checked the boiler. Still running, but when I switched it off, the hum stayed, unchanged. That didn't make sense. I stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to figure it out. It wasn't coming from outside. It didn't have that distant quality. It felt internal, like it was inside the walls or inside the space itself. I went upstairs. The hum followed, same volume, same tone. Didn't get quieter the further I moved from anything electrical. I stepped into the bedroom, closed the door behind me, still there. I sat on the edge of the bed, listened. The sound didn't echo, didn't bounce. It just existed. Flat. Constant. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like when you're in a lift. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I stood up again, walked back downstairs. The hum hadn't changed at all. I checked my phone. 12:18 a.m. I remember that clearly. I stood in the middle of the living room, just listening, trying to figure out if it was louder than before. It wasn't, but it felt closer, like I was more aware of it. I went to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. The hum stopped instantly. No fade, no reduction, just gone. The night air felt normal, cool, quiet. I could hear distant traffic again, a dog barking somewhere far off, everything how it should be. I stood there for a few seconds, then stepped back inside. The hum was there immediately, same volume, same tone, like I'd stepped back into it. I closed the door behind me. The pressure in my ears returned. I stood still, trying to pinpoint it. I walked slowly around the room. The sound didn't shift, didn't follow, didn't lead. It was just everywhere. I went back outside. Again, it stopped instantly. Silence. Normal. Back inside. It returned. No transition, no change. Just there. I did this a few times, in and out. Same result every time. I started to feel uneasy then. Not scared, just unsettled, because there was no source. Nothing I could identify. I went upstairs again. The hum followed. Same consistency. I lay down on the bed just to see if it changed. It didn't. If anything, it felt more noticeable lying still. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I closed my eyes. The hum didn't change. I opened them again. Checked the time, 12:23. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed. I sat up. The sound continued, uninterrupted. I went back downstairs, opened the door again, stepped outside. Silence, immediate, clean. I stood there longer this time, letting the normal sound settle. Then I went back in. The hum returned. But this time, it felt different. Not louder, just closer, more present, like it had shifted slightly. I stood in the hallway, listening. The pressure in my ears deepened for a moment, then held. I didn't stay inside much longer after that. I grabbed my keys, stepped outside, closed the door behind me. The silence outside felt heavier now, more noticeable. I stood on the pavement for a bit, then walked down the street, just to put some distance between me and the house. Everything outside felt normal. No hum, no pressure. I stayed out for maybe 20 minutes, then went back. Stood at the front door for a moment, listening. Nothing. I unlocked it, Opened the door, stepped inside, the hum was gone completely. No trace of it. The house felt normal again. Quiet. Still. I walked through each room. Nothing unusual, no sound, no pressure, everything back to how it should be. I checked the time, 12:41. That didn't match what I expected. It felt like I'd been outside longer. I stood in the living room for a while, just listening. Nothing. Eventually, I went to bed. Slept normally after that. The next day, everything was fine. No hum, no issues. I checked the appliances, everything working, no problems. But now, sometimes late at night, when the house gets really quiet, I find myself listening for that low hum, just to see if it's there again. I noticed it because Darren wouldn't drop it. He lives 2 doors down from me, mid-50s, the kind of guy who notices everything that happens on the street. Not in an annoying way, just observant. Keeps his place tidy, always outside doing something. He stopped me one morning while I was leaving for work. "Everything all right at yours last night?" he said. I asked what he meant. He pointed up roughly toward my roof. "Saw a light over your place. Late. Thought maybe you'd left something on." That didn't make sense. I told him I'd gone to bed around 11 and hadn't been back out. He shook his head slightly. "No, this was later. 1, maybe 2 in the morning. Just hovering there." I laughed it off at first. Figured he'd seen something from the road or maybe a reflection off the clouds. But he didn't look like he was guessing. "Didn't move like anything normal," he said. "Just sat there. Then it was gone." I nodded, said I'd check the cameras when I got home. I've got a basic setup: front door, driveway, and one at the back pointing toward the garden and roofline. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep an eye on things. I didn't think much of it during the day, but when I got back that evening, I checked anyway. Scrolled through the footage from the night before. Everything looked normal at first. Empty driveway, street quiet, no movement. Then I found the clip. 2:14 a.m. The camera had triggered. I opened it, the image looked steady. Then it flickered. Not like a glitch I'd seen before. More like the whole frame stretched slightly, just for a fraction of a second. The top of the image warped. The roofline bent. Then it snapped back. I replayed it. Same thing. A quick distortion. Then normal again. I checked the timestamp. 2:14:09. Then it jumped. 2:14. 5 seconds missing. I frowned, replayed it again. Nothing in those missing seconds. No movement before or after. Just that brief flicker. I went back a few minutes, checked earlier footage. Normal, then forward, normal. Only that one clip had the distortion. I stepped outside and looked up at the roof. Nothing unusual. No marks, no damage, just the usual tiles and guttering. I went back in and checked the front camera. Same time, same thing. A flicker, a slight warp, then the timestamp jump. No visible object, no light, just the effect. That's when it started to feel less like a coincidence. I checked the back camera again. Paused the clip right at the moment of the distortion. The image looked off, like the space above the roof had been stretched, not just blurred, shifted. I couldn't see anything there. But the way the image bent, it looked like something had passed through it. I leaned back in the chair, tried to think. Could have been a glitch, signal interference, something with the camera? That made sense, except it happened on 2 different cameras at the same time. I checked the system logs. Nothing unusual, no errors, no signal drops, everything looked normal. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sat in the living room with the live feed open on my phone, watching, waiting. Nothing happened for a while. The street stayed quiet. No movement, just the occasional flicker from passing headlights in the distance. Around 1:50, I started to feel tired, considered going to bed. Then the feed shifted, just slightly, the same distortion as before, but this time, I saw it happen. The top of the frame stretched, the roofline bent, and for a split second, there was something there. Not a shape, not clearly. Just a darker patch against the sky, like something was blocking it. Then it snapped back. The timestamp jumped, 5 seconds gone. I stared at the screen, heart rate picking up. I stood up, walked to the front door, opened it slowly, looked up, nothing. Just dark sky. I stepped out onto the pavement, looked again, nothing. No light, no movement. I went back inside, checked the feed. Everything looked normal again. I rewound the clip, watched it again, that same distortion, that same brief absence of something. But no clear object. I sat there for a while after that, didn't see anything else. Eventually went to bed, Didn't sleep much. The next morning, Darren was outside again. I asked him what exactly he'd seen. He described it simply. A light. Just above your roof. Didn't cast anything. Didn't move. Then it was gone. I showed him the footage. He watched it quietly, pointed at the moment where the image warped. That's when it was there, he said. But I can't see anything, I told him. He shrugged slightly. Wasn't like a normal light. I checked the footage again later that day, frame by frame, trying to catch something I'd missed. But there was nothing clear. Just that distortion, that missing time. It's happened a few more times since. Not every night, not even regularly, but enough that I keep checking. Same pattern, a flicker, a stretch in the image. 5 seconds gone, and nothing visible to explain it. I haven't seen the light myself, not directly. But now, sometimes late at night, I find myself looking up at the roof from outside, just to see if there's something hovering there that I can't quite make out. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a short vibration through the seat, like the car had idled unevenly for a second. Not strong enough to shake anything, just enough that I noticed it. I looked down at the dashboard. Engine was off, keys weren't even in the ignition. That's what made me sit up properly. I was parked in a lay-by just off a coastal road, about 10 minutes outside a place called Red Haven. Not a busy spot, just a gravel pull-in overlooking the water. I'd stopped there a few times before, mostly to clear my head after work. It was late, maybe around 11:40 p.m. The sky was clear, stars out, no moon. You could just about make out the line where the sea met the sky, but not much else. I'd been sitting there for a while, phone in my hand, not really paying attention to anything. Then the seat vibrated. Once. Brief. I held still. Waited. Nothing. I shifted slightly, thinking maybe I'd moved in a way that made the springs creak or something. Didn't feel the same. I leaned forward and turned the key halfway, just to check. Dashboard lit up. No issues. I turned it back off. Sat there again. A few seconds passed, then I felt it again. Same thing. A short, low vibration. Not from the engine. More like it came up through the floor. I frowned and glanced around. The car wasn't moving. The gravel outside was still. No wind, no passing cars. Nothing that could have caused it. I leaned forward again, this time resting my hand on the center console. Waited. Nothing. I sat back. Then without thinking, I looked up at the rearview mirror. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't behind me, not on the road. It was above, reflected faintly in the mirror. A soft light hanging somewhere overhead, not bright, just enough to stand out against the dark sky. I turned my head slightly, trying to look through the windshield. But I couldn't see it directly, only in the mirror. I adjusted it slightly. The glow stayed in view, faint, circular maybe. Hard to tell. It didn't have a clear edge, more like a patch of light. I sat there, staring at it. The vibrations stopped, completely. The car felt still again. I held my breath for a second, listening. Nothing, no sound at all. The glow didn't move, didn't flicker, just hovered there. I reached up and tilted the mirror again. The light stayed in roughly the same place. That's when it hit me. If it was something above the car, I should be able to see it directly. But when I looked up through the windshield, there was nothing, just stars. I leaned forward, craning my neck, trying to find the angle. Nothing. I leaned back again, looked at the mirror. The glow was still there. Same position. Same brightness. I swallowed. Felt a slight pressure in my ears. Subtle, like when you go through a tunnel. I shifted in the seat. The upholstery creaked normally. No vibration. I looked back at the mirror. The glow seemed closer. Not physically lower, just more defined. Like my eyes had adjusted to it. I reached up and touched the mirror, steadying it. The image didn't shake. The glow stayed fixed. I glanced down at my phone. Screen still on. Time read 11:43. I looked back up. The glow hadn't changed. I opened the door slowly. Stepped out of the car. The night air felt normal. Cool. Still. I looked up directly above me. Nothing. Just empty sky. I stepped back, leaned down slightly, and looked into the car again. Through the rearview mirror. The glow was still there. Exactly where it had been. That didn't make sense. I straightened up, looked at the sky again. Nothing. I bent down again. Looked through the mirror. Still there. I stayed like that for a few seconds, shifting between the two. Direct view. Nothing. Mirror. The glow. I felt that pressure in my ears increase slightly. I stood up fully this time. Stepped away from the car, looked up. Nothing. I walked a few steps further back, then leaned in again. Checked the mirror. The glow was fainter now, still there, but dimmer. I got back into the driver's seat, closed the door, sat still. The glow remained, barely visible now. I watched it carefully. It didn't move, didn't shift, just slowly lost brightness, evenly, until it blended into the darkness. And then, gone. I kept staring at the mirror. Nothing. Just the reflection of the back seat and the dark beyond. The pressure in my ears eased. The silence lifted slightly. I could hear the faint sound of the sea again. Distant. Normal. I checked the time. 11:49. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I started the engine. The car came to life normally. No issues. No strange sounds. I sat there for another minute. Then pulled out and drove home. Didn't stop again. Didn't check the mirror. The next day I went back to that spot, parked in the same place, same angle, checked the mirror, nothing, just normal reflection. I even tried sitting there for a while, engine off, waiting. Nothing happened. But now every time I sit in that car at night, I catch myself glancing at the rearview mirror more than I should, just to see if that faint glow shows up again. I noticed the compass before anything else. It was clipped to the strap of my bag, one of those small, cheap ones I kept more out of habit than necessity. The trail was clear enough, and I'd hiked that ridge before. It was late afternoon, heading into evening. The sky was overcast but bright, that flat gray where you can't really tell how much daylight you've got left. A light wind was pushing across the ridge, enough to move the grass in waves, but not strong enough to bother you. I was about halfway along when I glanced down at it. The needle was drifting, not spinning, just sliding slowly to one side. I stopped walking, held it still, watched it. It didn't snap back like it should. It kept moving, smooth, steady. Then it stopped, pointing somewhere that wasn't north. I frowned and tapped it lightly with my finger. Nothing. The needle didn't react, just stayed fixed. I turned slightly. I'm checking it against the direction of the path. It was wrong. By enough that it wasn't just a small error. I unclipped it and held it flat in my palm. Still wrong. I rotated it slowly. No change. The needle held its position no matter how I turned. That's when I felt that quiet unease. Not fear. Just something not lining up. I looked up. The ridge stretched out ahead, the path cutting along the top like it always did. Low grass, scattered rocks, the drop on one side and a slope on the other. Nothing unusual, no one else around, just me. I clipped the compass back onto my bag and kept walking. Told myself it was probably broken. Cheap thing, probably just worn out. After a few steps, I checked it again. Still wrong, same direction, didn't budge. I slowed down, started paying more attention to the landscape, trying to orient myself without it. The path was still clear, but something felt slightly off, like the space around me didn't match what I expected. I stopped again, turned around. The path behind me looked normal, but for a second I had the sense that it wasn't leading back the way it should. I shook that off. Just kept walking. The wind dropped suddenly. Not gradually, it just stopped. The grass went still, completely. I paused, looked around. The silence felt heavier than it should. No distant sounds, no movement. I could hear my own breathing more clearly than anything else. I checked the compass again. Still wrong. Unchanged. The needle hadn't moved at all. I looked up toward the horizon. The ridge dipped slightly in the distance, opening out to a wide view of the land beyond. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, barely noticeable at first. Just a small patch of light near the horizon. Not bright enough to stand out clearly, but it didn't match the rest of the sky. It wasn't the sun breaking through. The light was too contained, too focused. I stood there watching it. The glow didn't move, didn't spread, just sat there, low, right at the edge of where the land met the sky. I took a step forward. The ground felt normal, but my sense of direction didn't. I checked the compass again, still pointing the wrong way. I looked back up. The glow pulsed, once, not brighter, just sharper, like it snapped into clarity for a fraction of a second. Then it returned to how it was, faint, still. I stood there waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. The silence around me held. The air felt heavier, like the space had thickened slightly. I swallowed, felt a faint pressure in my ears. I took another step forward. The glow didn't change, didn't react, just stayed there. I glanced down at the compass again. The needle twitched, just slightly, then settled again, still wrong. I looked back at the horizon. The glow was still there, but it felt closer, not in distance, just in presence. Hard to explain. I stopped walking, didn't want to get any closer. The silence pressed in, I could hear my heartbeat now. Steady. Loud. Loud. I turned around slowly. The path behind me looked normal again, the ridge stretching back the way I'd come. I took a step in that direction. The air shifted slightly, not a breeze, just a change. I checked the compass again. The needle snapped. Quick. Sharp. Back to north. Exactly where it should be. I looked up immediately. The glow was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The horizon looked normal, flat, gray. The wind came back a second later, light at first, then steady again. The grass moved, the usual sounds returned, distant, faint. I stood there for a few seconds, letting everything settle. The pressure in my ears eased, my breathing slowed. I checked the compass again. Normal, working perfectly. I started walking back along the ridge. Didn't want to go any further. The path felt right again, the direction made sense. I got back to the car just as it was getting dark. Checked the time, 6:48. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stood there for a minute just thinking. Then I got in and drove home. The next day I checked the compass again. Still working fine. No issues. I even took it out on another hike. Normal. Always pointing north. But now, whenever I'm out on that ridge, I find myself checking it more often than I should. Just to see if it starts drifting again. I noticed it because I was looking at the ground. I'd just left a late shift, walking home the usual way through a quiet residential stretch. It was just after midnight, maybe closer to 1/2 Cold, dry night, no wind. The kind where every sound carries a bit further than it should. I had my hands in my jacket pockets, head down, just following the pavement. There's a line of streetlights along that road, spaced evenly. Old ones, slightly dim with that orange tint. You walk through alternating patches of light and shadow the whole way. I wasn't really thinking about anything. Just walking. Watching my shadow stretch out ahead of me, then shorten as I passed under each light. It's one of those automatic things your brain tracks without you realizing. That's why I noticed when it disappeared. I stepped into the next pool of light, and my shadow was just gone. Not shortened, not faint. Gone. For a second, I thought I just missed it. Maybe the angle was weird. I stopped walking, looked down properly. The pavement was lit. The light above me was on, steady, but there was no shadow. I shifted slightly, moved my foot. Nothing. No change. The ground stayed evenly lit, like I wasn't there. That's when I felt that quiet drop in my stomach. I looked up at the streetlight. It was working normally. No flicker, no dimming, just steady orange light. I looked around. No one else on the street. No cars passing. Nothing that would interfere with it. I stepped back slightly out of the light. My shadow snapped back into place behind me. Normal. I stepped forward again. Into the light. Gone. Completely gone. I stood there, not moving. The air felt still, quieter than it should have been. I could hear my own breathing more clearly. I looked at my hands, then back at the ground. Still no shadow. I turned slowly, checking if maybe it had shifted somewhere else. Nothing. No matter how I moved, it didn't appear. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like the air had changed slightly. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I stepped back again. Out of the light, the shadow returned, sharp, clear, exactly where it should be. I stepped forward again, into the light. Gone. I stayed there for a few seconds, watching the empty space where it should have been. Then, without warning, it came back. Instantly. No fade, no transition, just there again, exactly as it should be. I froze, stared at it. It looked normal, moved normally when I shifted my weight, nothing off about it. I looked up at the streetlight again, still steady, no change. I stepped out of the light, then back in again. The shadow stayed, normal. I stood there for a moment longer, trying to process it. The next streetlight came up. I watched my shadow as I stepped into it. It behaved normally, stretched, shifted, stayed consistent. I walked under another, same thing, normal. I slowed down as I approached the next one, watched carefully. Nothing unusual, everything working the way it should. I told myself it was just something with that one light, a weird angle, something I didn't understand, but it didn't feel like that. As I got further down the street, I noticed something else. The sound. It had dropped again, not completely gone, just reduced. Like the space around me had quieted slightly. I slowed down, looked back over my shoulder. The streetlight where it happened was still visible in the distance. It looked normal, no flicker, no difference from the others. I turned forward again, kept walking. Then I stepped under another light, and for a split second, the shadow lagged, just slightly, like it appeared a fraction of a second later than it should have. I stopped immediately, looked down. It was there, normal. But I knew it hadn't been immediate. I stepped back, then forward again. This time it appeared instantly. No delay. I stood there for a moment, listening. The quiet felt heavier now. The pressure in my ears was still there, faint, but noticeable. I kept walking, didn't stop again, didn't want to. By the time I reached my street, everything felt normal again. The sound was back. The air felt right. No pressure. I got home, unlocked the door, stepped inside. Everything was normal. Lights, sounds, nothing out of place. I checked the time, 12:41. That didn't feel right. It felt like I'd been walking longer. I went to bed not long after. Didn't sleep well. The next night, I took the same route, same time. I slowed down as I approached that street light, watched my shadow carefully. It stayed, didn't disappear, didn't flicker, nothing unusual. I walked under it twice, same result, normal. But now, every time I walk home at night, I find myself watching the ground a bit more than I used to, just to make sure my shadow's still there when it should be. I noticed it because the light came from the wrong direction. I was already awake, just lying there, staring at the ceiling. I'd woken up a bit before my alarm, the kind of half-awake state where you're not tired enough to fall back asleep, but not fully up either. The room was dim, that early morning gray, where everything's just shapes and outlines. My window faces east, so when the sun comes up, the light usually spreads slowly along the horizon, then starts to fill the room. I've seen it enough times that I don't really think about it, but that morning, it didn't spread, it appeared. I turned my head toward the window when I noticed the change. There was a strip of light, vertical, not wide, maybe the width of a door frame. It ran from the horizon up into the sky, a soft, pale glow, like daylight, but contained. Everything around it was still dark. I pushed myself up slightly, resting on one elbow, trying to understand what I was looking at. It didn't look like sunlight. It wasn't bleeding into the sky. It was just there. A column, perfectly still. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was cold, normal. Everything else felt normal, except that light. I walked over to the window, pulled the curtain back fully. The sky was still dark everywhere except for that strip. No gradual brightening, no spread, just that one narrow section glowing. I leaned closer to the glass. The edges of the light were soft but defined. It didn't flicker, didn't move, it just held. I looked at the horizon beneath it. Couldn't see the sun. No glow at the edges, nothing that suggested it was rising, just that vertical line. I checked the time on my phone, 5:21 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up. The light hadn't changed. The rest of the sky was still dark. I opened the window slightly. Cold air came in. No wind, no sound. It was quieter than it should have been. No distant traffic, no birds, nothing. I stood there listening. The silence felt heavier, like it was pressing in slightly. I swallowed, felt a faint pressure in my ears. I looked back at the light, still there, same brightness, same shape. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe something in the atmosphere. Clouds, light reflecting in a weird way. But there were no clouds. The sky was clear. I leaned further out of the window, trying to see if the strip had any depth. It didn't look like it. It looked flat, like it was part of the sky itself. I stayed there for a while, just watching. Then it changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The light began to retract, upward. The bottom edge lifted first. The part closest to the horizon dimmed and pulled back, like it was being drawn upward. I leaned closer, trying to follow it. The strip got shorter, the brightness stayed the same, but the height reduced, evenly. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again. No change. The silence held. The light continued to retract, up, until it was just a smaller section higher in the sky, then smaller again, and then gone. No fade, no spread, just gone. The sky returned to normal, dark, empty. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then, the usual morning light began. Slow, horizontal, spreading across the horizon like it always does. Birds started making noise, distant sounds came back, everything felt normal again. I stood there for a while just watching, trying to process what I'd seen. The light behaved exactly how it should. Nothing unusual about it, except that it was completely different from what I'd just watched. I checked the time again, 5:26. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stepped back from the window, closed it, pulled the curtain slightly, then opened it again. The sky looked normal, nothing out of place. I got ready for work after that, went through my usual routine, but I kept thinking about it, that vertical strip, the way it appeared, the way it pulled back upward. I mentioned it to a colleague later that day. They shrugged it off, said it was probably just a weird light effect, atmosphere doing something unusual. That made sense, enough that I didn't push it further. But the next morning, I woke up a bit earlier than usual, before sunrise, and I found myself watching the window, waiting, just to see if that vertical strip would appear again. It didn't. Not that day. But now, every time I wake up before sunrise, I look at the horizon first, just to make sure the light spreads the way it's supposed to. The power went out so cleanly it didn't even register at first. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a mug, when everything just cut. Lights, extractor fan, the low hum from the fridge, gone in the same instant. No flicker, no warning. I stood there for a second, hand still under the tap, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The house dropped into that flat, quiet darkness you only really notice when everything electrical disappears. I turned the tap off and looked around. There was a faint bit of light coming through the window, just enough to make out shapes. I checked my phone. No signal. That was the first thing that felt off. Usually you still get bars even in a power cut. I walked into the living room and looked out the front window. The whole street was dark. Every house. Streetlights off. No car headlights. Nothing. My name's Callum. I live in a small coastal town, nothing big, just rows of houses and a main road that runs down toward the water. Power cuts happen sometimes, but never like that. Never all at once, and never that quiet. I stepped outside. A couple of other people were out too. You could just about see them as silhouettes near their doors. No one was talking. Everyone was just looking. I followed their line of sight. Up. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The sky was overcast, low clouds, kind of uneven, like they'd been sitting there all evening. Then I noticed the glow. It wasn't bright. You could miss it if you weren't paying attention. A soft, pale light inside the clouds, forming a circle. Not a perfect outline like something drawn, but clearly rounded, contained. The rest of the clouds stayed dark, only that one section had the light in it. I took a few steps out onto the pavement, trying to get a better angle. The circle didn't move, didn't change shape, just sat there. I glanced around expecting to see some source for it. A spotlight. Something on the ground. But everything was dark, no power anywhere. No lights at all, just that faint glow in the sky. Someone a few houses down said, "You see that?" No one answered. We were all looking at it. The light didn't pulse, didn't flicker, just held steady. The edges were soft but consistent. It didn't spread into the surrounding clouds. It didn't drift. It didn't behave like light normally does. I checked the time on my phone. 9:31 p.m. I remember that clearly. I kept watching, waiting for it to do something, anything, but it didn't. It just stayed there, perfectly still. I noticed then how quiet it was. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Even the sea, which you can usually hear faintly at night, was gone, just silence. I swallowed and my ears popped slightly. Subtle, like a pressure shift. I looked around again. No one else seemed to react. They were just watching. Same as me, the glow didn't change. Seconds passed, or what felt like seconds. It was hard to tell. Then slowly, it started to fade, not outward, not shrinking, just dimming, evenly. The circle stayed the same size, the same shape, it just lost brightness. I watched it carefully, trying to catch any movement. There wasn't any. It just became less visible, until it blended back into the cloud, and then it was gone. The clouds returned to looking completely normal, dark, uneven, nothing unusual. For a few seconds, everything stayed still. Then one of the streetlights flickered, came back on, then another, then the houses. Lights returned one by one. You could hear things powering back up, the low hum of appliances, a car engine starting somewhere, normal sounds creeping back in. People started talking then, quiet at first, then louder, trying to make sense of it. Someone said it was probably just a reflection. Another said maybe it was something to do with the outage. No one sounded sure. I went back inside. The lights were on, everything working again. My phone signal came back a few minutes later. I I checked the time again, 9:36. That didn't feel right. It felt longer. I stood in the living room for a while, just looking out the window. The sky looked normal. Nothing unusual. I went to bed not long after. Didn't sleep much. The next day, I asked a couple of people about it. Everyone had seen it, same description, same shape, same way it faded, but no one had an explanation. A few nights later, I was out again, walking back from the shop. Power was fine, street lights on, everything normal. I happened to look up, and for a moment I thought I saw the faint outline of that same circle in the clouds. No glow, just the shape. Then it was gone. I didn't stop walking, but now, whenever the sky's overcast at night, I find myself looking up a bit longer than I used to, just to see if that shape comes back. I saw it for less than a second, but it didn't behave like anything I could explain. I was driving back from a late job somewhere just after 2 a.m., taking a route that cuts across a stretch of moorland. No houses, no streetlights, just long bends and low stone walls on either side. The kind of road where your headlights are the only thing defining the world in front of you. It was clear that night. No clouds. Cold enough that the air felt sharp when I'd stepped out earlier. I remember I had the radio off, just driving in silence. There's a section where the road climbs slightly and your headlights tilt upward for a moment as you crest it. I've driven it enough times to expect that brief shift in the beam. This time, when the lights angled up, they hit something. High above the road. For a split second, I saw a reflection. Metallic. Curved. Not bright, not like a mirror-catching light, but enough to show that it wasn't just empty sky. It didn't look like a plane. No blinking lights, no shape I could recognize, just a smooth surface catching the headlights, and then it moved. Instantly. Not drifting, not turning. Just one position, then another. Further to the right. Higher, maybe. Hard to tell. And then it was gone. The sky snapped back to normal. Stars, nothing else. I eased off the accelerator without thinking, the car slowing slightly as I tried to process what I'd just seen. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me. No other cars, no lights anywhere. I looked back up through the windshield. Empty sky. I told myself it had to be something ordinary. A plane at a weird angle. A reflection off something I couldn't place. But it hadn't moved like anything I knew. I kept driving, but slower now, eyes flicking up more than they should, half expecting to catch it again. The road leveled out after the crest. The headlights returned to their usual angle. Everything ahead looked normal. Stone walls, dark ground, nothing unusual. I drove another minute or so, trying to shake it off. Then I noticed something else. The air felt quieter, not silent, just reduced. Like the usual background noise had dropped slightly. I turned the radio on briefly, just to check. It worked fine. No static. I turned it off again. Didn't want the distraction. Another bend came up ahead, this one wider, opening up the view to the right. I glanced up again, and for a second, I thought I saw it. Not clearly, just a darker patch against the sky. Something that didn't match the rest. I slowed again, trying to focus on it, but the moment I tried to look directly at it, it shifted. Same as before. Instant, no movement between positions. Just there, then somewhere else. Further away, and then gone, completely. I felt that drop in my stomach then, that quiet realization that something wasn't lining up. I kept driving, didn't stop, didn't want to. But the road curved again, dropping slightly this time. My headlights stayed low. No more upward angle, no chance to catch anything above, but I kept glancing up anyway. Nothing. Just stars. After a few minutes, I noticed my hands were gripping the wheel tighter than usual. I forced myself to relax a bit, focused on the road. Told myself it was probably just my eyes, or something reflecting off the windshield. That made sense. Enough to keep going. But then the headlights flickered. Just once. Not off, just a slight dip in brightness, then back to normal. I frowned, glanced at the dashboard. Everything looked fine, no warning lights. I looked back up, and for a split second, I saw the reflection again, further ahead, higher. The same smooth, curved surface, catching the light for just long enough to register. Then, gone. This time, I slowed almost to a stop, the car rolling forward slowly. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see more of the sky. Nothing, just empty. I turned off the headlights for a second. The world disappeared. Complete darkness. I turned them back on quickly. The road returned. Everything normal, but I had this feeling like something was still up there, just out of sight. I didn't stay there long. Picked up speed again, wanted to get off that stretch of road. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No more reflections, no flickers, nothing unusual. I got home around 2:25, parked the car, sat there for a minute before getting out, just looking up. The sky above my street looked normal, nothing out of place. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep, didn't sleep much. The next day, I checked the car. Headlights were fine, no issues. I even drove the same route again later that week. Daytime this time. Nothing unusual, just open land and sky. But now, whenever I drive that road at night, I catch myself watching for that moment when the headlights tilt upward. Because that's the only time I saw it clearly. And I'm not sure I want to see it again, but I still look. I woke up already aware of the space next to the bed. Not from a noise, not from a dream. Just that immediate feeling that someone had been standing there a second before I opened my eyes. I didn't move at first, just lay there, looking straight up at the ceiling. The room was dark, but not completely. There was a faint gray light coming in from the window, early morning, just before sunrise. Everything looked normal. The wardrobe door was shut. The chair in the corner was empty. The door was closed. But that feeling didn't go away. It stayed there, like something had just stepped back out of reach. I turned my head slowly toward the side of the bed. Nothing. Just empty floor. But I knew exactly where I'd felt it. Right there. Close enough that if someone had been standing there, I would have been able to reach out and touch them. I pushed myself up onto one elbow, scanning the room more carefully. Still nothing. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was cold. Normal. Everything normal. Except that feeling. I walked over to the door first, still locked, chain on. Exactly how I left it. I opened it anyway, looked out into the hallway, empty, quiet. I closed it again, turned back toward the room. That's when I noticed the curtains. They were slightly open, not wide, just enough that a narrow strip of light was coming through. I stared at them for a second, because I always close them fully before I go to bed. Every night. It's just a habit. I walked over slowly. The fabric hung still, no breeze, no movement. I touched them, cold, normal. I pulled them closed completely, stood there for a moment, looking at the window. Nothing outside, just the faint outline of the street. I turned back toward the room. The feeling had eased slightly, but it hadn't gone. I checked my phone, 5:12 a.m. I remember that clearly. I sat back down on the bed, tried to think. Maybe I'd gotten up during the night and opened the curtains without remembering. But that didn't feel right. I don't usually sleepwalk. And the way they were opened, it wasn't messy. It was deliberate, just enough to let light through. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to settle myself. But my attention kept drifting back to that spot beside the bed. After a minute, I turned my head again. Looked at it. Nothing there, just empty space. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again. The room looked the same, but something felt slightly off, like the space near the bed wasn't quite the same as the rest of the room. I sat up again, looked more carefully. The light in the room seemed uneven, not bright enough to show clearly, just enough that I could see shapes. I stood up and walked around the bed. Stopped where I'd felt that presence, stood there. Nothing, no change, no sensation. I turned slowly, looking at the bed from that angle. Everything looked normal. I sat back down, checked the time again, 5:13. That didn't feel like a full minute had passed. I lay back down, closed my eyes again, and for a second I had the same feeling, that someone was there, right beside me. I opened my eyes immediately. Nothing. Just the room. I sat up again, faster this time. Heart rate picking up slightly. Not panic. Just something wasn't right. I stood there for a moment trying to listen. No sound. No movement. The house was quiet. I went to the window again, pulled the curtains open fully this time. Let the light in. The room brightened slightly. Everything looked normal. I turned back. The space beside the bed looked like it always did. Flat. Empty. No shadows out of place. I stood there for a few seconds, then sat down again. Waited. Nothing else happened. After a while, I got up and started my day. Made coffee. Moved around the house. Everything felt normal again. The feeling faded as fried. By mid-morning, it was gone completely. I told myself it was just one of those things. Half asleep. Mind playing tricks. But that night, when I went to bed, I made sure the curtains were completely closed, checked them twice, lay down, turned the light off, and for a while I just stared at that spot beside the bed, waiting to see if it felt occupied again. It didn't. Not that night. But now, every time I wake up in the early morning, before I even move, I check the curtains first, just to see if they're still closed. I noticed it because the air stopped feeling like air. I'd gone camping alone, about an hour outside town, in a patch of woodland I'd been to a few times before. Nothing remote enough to get lost in, but quiet enough that you don't see anyone once you're off the main trail. It was early autumn, cold night, but dry. No rain, no fog, just still, clear air. I'd set up the tent just before dark, had something to eat, then sat out for a while listening to the usual sounds. Leaves shifting, branches creaking slightly, the occasional distant movement deeper in the woods. Normal. That's why it stood out when it stopped. I was sitting on one of those small fold-out stools, just staring into the dark between the trees when everything went quiet. Not gradually. All at once. The leaves stopped moving. The faint background noise dropped out. Even the wind, what little there was, just cut. I remember thinking it was strange, but not enough to worry about yet. Then the air changed. It felt heavier. Not thicker exactly, just like there was more of it. Like the space around me had increased in pressure. My ears picked it up first. That subtle feeling you get when you're going up or down a hill too fast. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I stood up slowly, looking around. The trees were still, completely still. No movement anywhere. I listened. Nothing. No insects. No distant sounds. Just silence. I stepped a little away from the tent. The ground felt the same. Everything looked normal. But the air, it felt wrong, like it was pressing in slightly from all sides. I took a slow breath. Even that felt different. Not harder, just noticeable. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pick out anything that had changed. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint distortion between the trees, like heat haze. But there was no heat. It was cold enough that my breath showed faintly. The distortion moved, slowly, not drifting like fog, more like it was passing through, a ripple. That's the closest I can get to it. A subtle shimmer moving through the trees, bending the lines of branches and trunks as it passed. I stayed still, watching it. It didn't have a clear shape, just a section of the woods where things didn't look right. The trunks looked slightly warped. The gaps between branches shifted, then returned to normal as it moved past. It didn't make a sound, didn't disturb anything physically, leaves didn't move, branches didn't shake, just the visual distortion. It moved from left to right, slow, steady. I felt the pressure in my ears increase slightly as it got closer. I swallowed again, no change. I didn't move, didn't want to. The shimmer reached the area just beyond my tent. For a moment, I thought it was going to pass right through me, but it shifted slightly, changed its path just enough to avoid where I was standing. That's what made it feel worse, like it had adjusted, not randomly, on purpose. It continued past, the distortion moving through the trees behind me now. I turned slowly to follow it. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just kept that same steady movement. The pressure in the air started to ease slightly as it moved away. The shimmer grew fainter, harder to see until it was gone. The trees returned to normal, perfectly still. For a few seconds, nothing changed. Then, the wind came back. Light at first, leaves started moving again. The background noise returned, gradually, like someone had turned it back on. I stood there for a while, just listening, trying to process what I'd seen. Everything felt normal again. The air didn't have that weight anymore. My ears felt fine. I walked back toward the tent. Stopped just before reaching it, looked at the space where the shimmer had passed. Nothing. Just ground and trees. I crouched down, touched the ground, cold, damp, normal. I stood up again, looked around, no sign of anything. I thought about packing up and leaving right then, but it was dark, and the path out isn't great at night, so I stayed. Got into the tent, zipped it up, lay there, listening. Every sound felt louder after that, every shift in the leaves, every creak. I didn't sleep much, kept expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. Morning came normally, light filtering through the trees, everything looking exactly how it should. I packed up and left. Walked back to the car. The woods felt normal again. No pressure, no silence, just the usual sounds. I went back there a couple weeks later. Same spot, same time of evening. Nothing happened. Everything normal. But now, When I'm out in the woods, if the air suddenly goes quiet, I pay attention because I don't think that shimmer was random, and I don't think it passed through by accident. I noticed it because the motion alert didn't match anything I could see. I'd just gotten home from work around 6 in the evening, and my phone had a notification from the front camera. It's one of those basic setups, just a small camera mounted above the door, pointing at the driveway and part of the street. Normally it picks up cars passing or someone walking by. I opened the clip while I was still in the hallway. At first it looked like nothing. Empty driveway, street quiet. Then the image shifted, not like a glitch I'd seen before. The whole frame stretched slightly, like it had been pulled sideways for a fraction of a second. The edges of the driveway blurred. The car parked across the street looked warped, like the lines didn't quite line up anymore. Then it snapped back to normal. I replayed it. Same thing. Stretch, distort, back to normal. I checked the timestamp, 7:40:13. Then it jumped. Then it teamed. 5 seconds gone. I frowned, replayed it again. There was nothing in those missing seconds. Just that distortion right before the skip. No person, no car, nothing that would trigger motion. I stepped outside and looked at the driveway. Everything looked normal. No signs of anything. I went back in and checked earlier footage. Nothing like it. No other skips, no distortions, just normal recordings. I told myself it was probably just the camera lagging. Cheap system. Stuff like that happens. I made dinner, tried not to think about it. But later that night, around 10, I checked the camera again, just out of curiosity. Everything looked fine. Live feed was steady, no distortion. I left it on for a minute, watching. Nothing changed. I went to bed around midnight, slept normally, woke up the next morning and checked the app again. Another notification, same camera, different time. 2:16 a.m. I opened the clip. Same pattern, empty driveway, no movement. Then the image stretched. This time it looked worse, like the middle of the frame had been pulled forward slightly, while the edges lagged behind. The fence line bent, the ground looked uneven. Then it snapped back. Timestamp jumped. 5 seconds missing again. I watched it a few times. The distortion didn't look random. It looked directional, like something had moved through the frame, but without being visible. Just the effect of it passing. I went outside again. Morning light this time. Everything normal. I checked the camera itself. Mounted securely. No damage. No loose wiring. I even tapped it lightly to see if I could recreate the distortion. Nothing. That evening, I mentioned it to my neighbor Craig. He shrugged it off. Probably just interference, he said. Wi-Fi or something. That made sense. Enough to settle it for a bit. But that night I kept checking. Around 2 a.m., I was still awake. Couldn't sleep. So I opened the live feed, just watched it. The driveway was empty, street quiet, no movement. The image was steady. Then it happened in real time. The frame stretched, just like in the recordings. But seeing it live felt different, more immediate. The distortion moved across the screen from left to right, like something invisible was passing through. The fence warped, the ground shifted, the edges of the frame bent inward slightly. Then it snapped back. I stared at the screen, heart rate picking up. The timestamp on the live feed froze for a second, then jumped forward. 5 seconds. Gone. I checked the time on my phone. It didn't match. It felt like less time had passed. I stood up, walked to the front door, opened it slowly, looked outside. Nothing, just the driveway. Still, quiet. I stepped out onto the porch. The air felt flat, not cold, not warm, just still. I looked around. No movement, no sound. I went back inside, closed the door, checked the camera feed again. Everything looked normal. No distortion. I stayed up for another hour, watching. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I checked the recorded clip. It had saved the event. Same distortion, same 5-second skip. I started checking older footage. Scrolled back through the past week. There were more. Not many, but a few. Same pattern. Always late at night, always 5 seconds missing. Always that stretch. I hadn't noticed them before. They were easy to miss if you weren't looking. I started paying more attention after that, watching the live feed more often. Most nights, nothing happened, just normal recordings. But every few days, there'd be another one. Same distortion, same missing time. I never saw anything in the frame. Nothing that caused it. Just the effect. like something passing through space the camera could see, but not capture. I haven't found an explanation for it. The camera still works fine. No issues during the day, no problems with other recordings, just those moments, late at night, 5 seconds gone, and the image stretching like something moved through it. I noticed it because the water stopped behaving like water. I was out early, just before sunrise, fishing along the edge of a reservoir a few miles outside town. It's a quiet place, not many people go that early, especially during the week. I'd parked up, walked down the path, and set up near a shallow section where the bank slopes gently into the water. It was cold. Not freezing, but enough that your breath hangs for a second before disappearing. The surface of the water was mostly still, just small ripples moving across from a light breeze. I'd been there maybe half an hour, line in, not catching anything, just watching the water like you do. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, a faint glow under the surface, maybe 10 feet out from where I was sitting. But there wasn't anything above it to reflect. The sky was still dim, no direct sunlight yet, no lights around. Nothing that would cause that kind of glow. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. The glow was circular, not perfectly sharp, but clearly defined. A soft, pale light sitting just beneath the surface. The water above it didn't ripple. That's what stood out. Everywhere else, the surface moved slightly with the breeze, but directly over the glow, still, completely still, like that patch of water had been separated from the rest. I stood up slowly, walked closer to the edge. The glow didn't react, didn't shift, just stayed there. Same size, same brightness. I looked around, half expecting to see someone else nearby, maybe something in the water. Nothing, just me. The quiet felt heavier then, like the usual background noise had dropped off. I crouched down near the edge. The water was clear enough that you could usually see a bit beneath the surface. But here, it looked different. Not murky, just undefined. Like the glow wasn't coming from a specific depth. More like it existed within the water rather than under it. I reached out and dipped my fingers in. The surface broke normally. Cold water, no resistance. But the glow didn't change. It stayed exactly where it was. I moved my hand through it. Nothing. No warmth, no sensation, just water. I pulled my hand back out, watched the ripples spread. They stopped at the edge of the glow. Didn't pass through. That didn't make sense. I leaned closer. The glow remained steady. The edges didn't blur, didn't react to the movement. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like when you change altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I sat back slightly, keeping my eyes on it. The glow didn't move, didn't pulse, just stayed there. I checked the time on my phone, 5:47 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back at the water. Still the same. Then, slowly, the glow began to shrink. Not fading, not dimming, just getting smaller. Evenly. Like the circle was tightening in on itself, the edges stayed defined, the brightness stayed the same, it just reduced in size. I leaned forward again, watching. The pressure in my ears increased slightly, the water above it remained still, completely separate from the rest of the surface. The circle got smaller and smaller, until it was only a few inches across. Then, it was gone. No fade, no ripple, nothing. The water returned to normal. Ripples moved across the surface where it had been, like nothing had ever been there. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the spot, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The quiet lifted slightly. I could hear distant birds. The breeze felt normal again. I checked the time. 5:52. That didn't feel right. It had felt shorter. I stood up slowly, looked around again. Still no one else there. I reeled in the line without thinking. Didn't want to keep fishing. Packed my stuff up. But before I left, I walked along the edge of the water to where the glow had been. Stood there for a minute, just looking down. Nothing unusual, just water. I dropped a small stone into the spot. It sank normally. Ripples spread out evenly, no interruption. I left after that. Didn't stay any longer. The next day I went back. Same time, same spot. Water looked normal, no glow, no still patch, just the usual surface movement. I stood there for a while watching. Nothing happened. But now, whenever I'm near water, I find myself looking a bit closer at the surface, just to see if there's a spot that isn't moving like it should. I saw it just past the gate with the broken post. I remember that detail because I use it as a marker when I'm driving that route. There's a stretch of road that runs along open farmland for a few miles, nothing but fields on both sides and a few scattered trees. No streetlights, no houses close enough to matter, just hedges and dark space. It was late, around 11:50 p.m. I'd been visiting a friend out near the edge of the village and took the longer road home to avoid the main roadworks. There was a low layer of fog sitting over the fields. Not thick enough to cover everything, just a shallow blanket, maybe a couple feet high in places. It drifted slowly across the ground, following the direction of the wind. You could see it sliding along the fields, breaking around fence posts and patches of grass. I remember thinking it looked calm. Then I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was just my headlights catching the fog at a weird angle. You get that sometimes where the beam reflects back at you. But this was different. The glow wasn't coming from my car. It was under the fog. A soft, pale light moving across the field to my right. I slowed down instinctively, leaning forward slightly over the wheel. The fog above it looked normal, still drifting with the wind, but the light, it moved the other way. Smooth, steady. Not fast, not slow, just sliding under the fog like it was following its own path. I kept driving, but slower now, trying to get a better look. The light didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just held a consistent brightness. Not strong enough to light up the field, but enough to be clearly visible. I glanced at the hedges. They were moving slightly with the wind. The fog above the light followed that movement, but the glow underneath didn't. It just kept going, cutting across the field at a different angle. That's when I felt that quiet unease settle in. Not fear, just something not lining up. I eased off the accelerator a bit more. The car rolled forward slowly. The light stayed in view, keeping pace for a moment. Then it shifted, not direction, just position, like it adjusted slightly deeper into the field. I blinked, trying to keep track of it. The fog thickened briefly in one patch. The light passed through it without changing. It didn't brighten, didn't dim, just stayed the same. I checked the time on the dashboard, 11:52. I remember that clearly. I looked back at the field. The light was still there, still moving against the wind. I rolled the window down a few inches. Cold air came in. I listened. Nothing. No sound from the field, no hum, no movement. Just the faint noise of my tires on the road. I drove a bit further. The angle changed slightly. The light looked closer now. Not physically closer, but more defined. The edges of it seemed sharper. I couldn't tell what shape it was. It wasn't a perfect circle, more like an uneven patch, but it stayed contained, didn't spread, didn't cast shadows, just existed. I slowed almost to a stop, the car barely moving now. The light continued its steady path. Then it paused, not fully stopped, just slowed, like it hesitated. I held my breath without realizing. The fog above it shifted slightly with the wind. The light didn't. Then it moved again. Same direction, same smooth motion. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like the air had changed. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I leaned forward, trying to see if there was anything beneath the fog. Nothing visible, just that glow. I glanced ahead at the road, then back at the field. The light had moved further along, still under the fog, still against the wind. I pressed the accelerator slightly, keeping pace with it. The car picked up speed. The light remained in view. For a few seconds, we moved alongside each other. Me on the road, it in the field. Then the fog shifted. A thicker patch rolled over the area. The light passed into it. And for a moment, it looked brighter, not much, just enough to notice. Then it dimmed again, and then it disappeared. No fade, no gradual loss, just gone. The fog continued moving as it had been. The field returned to darkness. I slowed down again, looking at the spot where it had been. Nothing, just grass and fog. I kept driving, didn't stop, but I kept glancing back in the mirror. Nothing behind me, just the road and the faint outline of the fields. I checked the time again, 11:57. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I drove the rest of the way home without seeing anything else. Everything felt normal again. No pressure in my ears, no strange movement, just the usual drive. The next day, I went back in daylight, parked near that same stretch, walked out into the field. The ground looked normal, no marks, no signs of anything, just grass and soil. I stood there for a bit, trying to line up where I'd seen the light. Couldn't find anything. But now, every time I drive that road at night, if there's fog, I slow down when I reach that spot. just to see if something's moving underneath it again. I noticed it because I lost track of it. I was lying on the hood of my car, parked up at the edge of a dirt turnout just outside a place called Weatherfell. It's one of those spots people go to watch the sky because there's no light pollution for miles, no houses nearby, no road noise once things settle down. It was late, around 1 a.m., cold but clear. No clouds, just a sky full of stars. I'd been there maybe 20 minutes already, just letting my eyes adjust, picking out the ones I recognized. I'm not an expert or anything, but you start to remember patterns after a while. That's why it stood out. I was looking at a cluster slightly to the right of where I'd been focusing, just letting my eyes drift across it, when one of the stars disappeared. Not faded, not dimmed, just gone. For a second, I thought I'd blinked at the wrong time, so I blinked again, slower. The star was back. Same position, same brightness. I kept my eyes on it, waiting. Nothing happened. It just sat there, like every other star. I shifted slightly on the hood, adjusting my angle, trying to get comfortable again. Then it happened again. The same star. Gone. Just for a second, then back. That's when I sat up, because that didn't feel like my eyes. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my knees, staring at it properly now. Everything else in the sky stayed steady. No clouds drifting through, no planes. Nothing that would explain it. Just that one point. I kept watching. Seconds passed. Nothing. The star held steady. I started to doubt it. Thought maybe I just imagined it. Eyes playing tricks. Then it blinked out again. Shorter this time. Just a quick absence. Then back. Same brightness. Same position. I didn't move, didn't even blink for a bit. Just kept my eyes locked on it. The longer I stared, the more something felt off. Not about the star itself, about everything around it. The sky felt flatter, like it had lost some depth. Hard to explain. I glanced away for a second, looking at another part of the sky. Everything else looked normal. I looked back. The star was still there. I waited. Nothing. It didn't blink again. I checked the time on my phone. 1:18 a.m. I remember that because I checked it again later. I put the phone down beside me and lay back again. Kept my eyes on that same spot, trying to see if it would happen again. It didn't. Minutes passed. The star stayed steady. I started to relax a bit, told myself it was probably just something passing in front of it that I couldn't see, or my eyes adjusting. Then I noticed something else. The stars around it looked slightly delayed. Not in a big way, just a subtle lag when I shifted my gaze, like they took a fraction of a second longer to settle into place. I tested it, moved my eyes quickly from one point to another. Everything else snapped into position instantly. That area, it didn't. It felt like it had to catch up. I sat up again, focused on the same star. It stayed steady, no blinking, but now I couldn't shake that feeling, like it wasn't part of the sky in the same way as everything else. I rubbed my eyes, looked away, then back. Still there, still normal, except it didn't feel normal anymore. I picked up my phone again, opened the camera, tried to zoom in, couldn't really capture anything useful, just a faint point of light on the screen. No blinking, no movement. I lowered the phone, looked with my eyes again. The star was still there. I checked the time, 1:18. Same as before. I frowned. That didn't seem right. I was sure at least a couple minutes had passed. I tapped the screen. The time ticked forward, 1:19. I stared at it for a second, then looked back up. The star was gone. Not blinking, not fading, just gone. I scanned the sky, trying to find it again. The cluster looked the same, but there was a gap where it had been. I leaned forward, trying to focus. Maybe I just lost it, but I knew roughly where it was, and it wasn't there anymore. I sat there for a while, just looking, waiting. Nothing. The sky stayed steady. Normal. I checked the time again, 1:26. That didn't match what I expected at all. It felt like only a few minutes had passed. I got off the hood of the car, stood there for a bit, looking up. The air felt colder now. The quiet around me felt heavier. I didn't stay much longer after that. Got back in the car, started it up. The engine sounded louder than it should have, like the silence had been covering something up before. I drove home. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. The next night, I went back. Same spot, same time. Clear sky again. I lay on the hood, found the same cluster, and the star was there. Same position, same brightness. I watched it for a long time. Nothing happened. No blinking, no disappearing. Just steady. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been nothing. Eyes playing tricks. I stayed a bit longer, then left. But now, whenever I look at the sky long enough, I find myself watching for that one point, just to see if it disappears again. I noticed it because nothing else reacted to it. I was walking back from a late shift, just taking the usual route through a quiet residential street about 10 minutes from my flat. It was just after 11, maybe closer to half past. Cold night, dry, no wind. One of those evenings where everything feels still. The street runs in a straight line for a while, with cars parked along both sides. No movement, no people out. Just the occasional house with a light on behind the curtains. I had my hands in my pockets, head down, not really thinking about anything. Then I saw the light. It was above the cars on the left side, not high, maybe 10 or 15 feet up. Just hovering there. Dim. Not bright like a streetlight or a car headlight, more like a dull glow. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe from a window or something, but it wasn't touching anything. It didn't cast light onto the cars. Didn't reflect off the roofs or the windows. It just hung there, like it existed separately from everything else. I slowed down, stopped walking after a few steps, stared at it. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed in place. I looked around, trying to find the source. No open windows with lights on in that direction. No movement inside any of the houses. The streetlights were further down and their light looked completely different. This was softer, contained. I took a step closer. The light stayed where it was. Same height, same brightness. I moved another step, still nothing changed. That's when I realized how quiet it was, not just normal quiet. Everything felt muted. No distant traffic, no wind through the trees, nothing. I stood there, just listening. The light remained steady. I tilted my head slightly, trying to see if it changed angle or shape. It didn't. From every position, it looked the same. Flat, almost like it didn't have depth. I took another step forward. Now I was maybe 5 or 6 meters away from the nearest car. The light hovered just above the row. I expected it to react somehow, move, dim, do something. It didn't. I glanced down at the cars, no reflections, no shadows changing. It was like the light wasn't interacting with anything, just existing. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like when you go up a hill. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I looked back up. The light seemed closer, not physically closer, just more defined. I couldn't tell if it had actually moved or if I was just focusing on it more. I took another step. The pressure increased slightly. I stopped. Didn't want to get any closer. The light held steady. Then, slowly, it began to fade, not dimming outward, not shrinking, just becoming less visible, evenly. The edges stayed the same. The shape didn't change, it just lost brightness. I watched it the whole time. Didn't take my eyes off it. The pressure in my ears eased as it faded. After a few seconds, it was barely there, just a faint outline. Then, gone. No flicker, no movement, just gone. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space. Nothing. The street looked normal again. The quiet lifted slightly. I could hear a car in the distance, a door closing somewhere. I walked over to where the light had been, stood between the parked cars, looked up. Nothing, just dark sky. I reached out and touched the roof of one of the cars. Cold metal. Normal. No warmth, no sign anything had been there. I stepped back onto the pavement, looked around again. Everything felt normal, like nothing had happened. I checked the time on my phone, 11:37. That didn't seem right. I felt like I'd been standing there longer. I walked the rest of the way home without stopping, kept glancing back once or twice. Nothing behind me, just the empty street. When I got inside, I stood by the window for a minute, looking down at the same row of cars. Nothing unusual, no light, no movement. I went to bed not long after, didn't sleep well. The next night, I took the same route, same time. I slowed down as I reached that stretch, looked at the parked cars, nothing there, just normal streetlight reflections. I kept walking, but now, every time I pass that street at night, I find myself looking above the cars, just to see if that dim light is hanging there again. I noticed it because the screen lit up my face. Not bright, just enough that I woke up thinking I'd left something on. I remember squinting, still half asleep, expecting to see my phone lying on the nightstand like usual. It wasn't. It was standing upright, leaning slightly against the wall, screen facing me. That's what pulled me out of it properly. I pushed myself up onto my elbows and stared at it for a second. My phone doesn't stand like that on its own. The case is flat, no kickstand, nothing that would hold it upright. But there it was, balanced neatly like someone had placed it there. The screen was on, but dim. Lock screen, no notifications. I reached over slowly and picked it up. The first thing I saw was the battery, 3%. That didn't make sense. I'd put it on charge before going to bed. I always do. It had been fully charged when I unplugged it. I looked at the cable, still plugged into the socket, the end of it resting on the nightstand where I'd left it, not connected to the phone. I frowned, trying to think back. Maybe I'd unplugged it without remembering. But I don't do that. And even if I had, it shouldn't have dropped from full to 3% overnight. I checked the time, 3:06 a.m. I remember that clearly. I sat there for a few seconds, just holding the phone, trying to wake up properly. The room felt normal, dark, quiet, nothing out of place. But there was this lingering feeling, like I just interrupted something. I looked at the wall where the phone had been leaning. There was nothing there. No marks, no reason it should have been able to stand like that. I tried to recreate it, placed the phone back against the wall. It slipped almost immediately, fell flat onto the table. I tried again, adjusting the angle. Same result. It wouldn't stay upright. I picked it up again. The screen dimmed slightly. Still 3%. I checked the battery usage. Nothing unusual. No apps running in the background. No reason for it to drain like that. I plugged it back in. The charging symbol came up. Normal. I set it down flat this time. Didn't try to stand it again. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. After a few minutes, I closed my eyes, but I didn't fall asleep. Something felt off. Not in a big way, just wrong. I opened my eyes again. The phone screen was still on, faint glow. I sat up slightly. The battery had gone up to 4%. Charging. Normal. I glanced at the time again. 3:08. 2 minutes had passed. It felt longer. I lay back down again, tried to relax, but my attention kept drifting back to the phone, the way it had been standing. The battery, it didn't add up. After a while, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was waking up again. Same position, same room, but something felt different. The air felt still, heavier. I turned my head slightly. The phone was upright again, same position as before, leaning against the wall, screen on. I sat up straight, heart rate picking up. I hadn't touched it. I was sure of that. The cable was still plugged into the wall, not connected to the phone. I picked it up again. The battery said 2%. Lower than before. I checked the time, 3:06, same as before. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. I'd seen it change. I'd seen it at 3:08. I tapped the screen. It responded normally. Everything worked, but the time, it didn't move. I waited, watched it. After a few seconds, it ticked forward. 3:0. I felt that drop in my stomach then. I set the phone down carefully, flat this time, kept my eyes on it. It stayed still. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. Door closed, wardrobe shut, everything where it should be. I looked back at the phone. Still flat, screen dimming. Normal. I lay back down again, but I didn't close my eyes this time. Deuce just stared at the ceiling, listening. After a minute or two, I heard something. Faint. Not a sound exactly. More like a shift in the room. I turned my head slowly. The phone was upright again. I didn't see it move. It was just there, standing, leaning against the wall. I sat up immediately, reached over, grabbed it. The battery said 1%. I checked the cable, still unplugged. I plugged it in quickly. The charging symbol appeared. I didn't set it down this time, just held it, staring at the screen. The time moved normally. 3:09, 3:10. Everything looked fine, but my hand felt slightly numb, like I'd been holding something vibrating, even though the phone wasn't. I set it down flat again, kept watching it. It didn't move. I stayed awake after that, didn't try to sleep. Just sat there, watching the phone, watching the room. Nothing else happened. Morning came eventually. Light through the curtains, everything looked normal. The phone was fully charged again. Sitting flat on the nightstand, exactly where I'd left it. I checked the battery history. There was a drop overnight, but it didn't explain how fast it had drained, or why it had been unplugged, or how it had ended up standing. I tried to recreate it again later. Same result. It wouldn't stay upright. Now, every night when I go to bed, I make sure the phone is flat, plugged in, exactly where it should be. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I don't reach for it straight away. I look first, just to see what position it's in. I saw it right before the bend. I was driving back from a late shift somewhere just past midnight on one of those narrow country roads that barely fits two cars. Hedges on both sides, no streetlights, just your headlights and whatever they catch. It had been windy earlier. Not a storm, just steady enough that you could hear it pushing against the car and rattling the hedges. By the time I was heading home, it had died down a bit, but you could still see the branches moving. I remember because I'd been watching them, half out of habit. The road curved slightly to the left up ahead, and as I came toward it, my headlights swept across the lane. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was dust, a faint cloud of something drifting across the road, caught in the beam of the headlights. But it didn't look right. The particles were moving, sideways, not blowing with the wind. Against it. I slowed down without really thinking. The cloud wasn't thick. You could see straight through it, but it was dense enough to notice, like a fine mist or ash, except each bit seemed to move with purpose. I remember gripping the wheel a bit tighter, trying to focus on it. The wind was pushing the hedges one way, the dust, or whatever it was drifting the other. Smooth, steady, not swirling, just crossing the road. I told myself it was just some weird airflow thing. Maybe the shape of the road or the hedges was redirecting it. That made sense for about 2 seconds. Then I drove into it. I expected it to hit the windshield, smear, scatter, something. But it didn't. The moment the headlights passed through it, it was gone. Completely. Like it had never been there. I checked the windshield instinctively. Clear. No marks. No residue. Nothing. I kept driving, glancing in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No dust. No movement. Just darkness. I frowned, trying to process it. Maybe it had been thinner than I thought. Maybe I'd just driven through it too fast to notice. That's what I told myself. I drove on. A minute later, I saw it again. Further ahead. Same kind of faint cloud, crossing the road, same direction, against the wind. This time I slowed down more, almost to a crawl. The headlights caught it clearly. Tiny particles. Too uniform. Not like normal dust or mist. And again, they moved smoothly across the road. No turbulence, no randomness. Just a steady drift. I stopped the car, right there in the lane, engine idling, watching it. The cloud continued crossing, didn't react to the car, didn't change speed. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see it better. The particles didn't reflect light the way dust should. They weren't sparkling or catching the beam. They just existed in it. I rolled down the window. Cold air came in. I stuck my hand out slightly. The cloud was still a few meters ahead. I couldn't feel anything. No change in the air, no shift in temperature, just normal wind. I pulled my hand back in. The cloud reached the other side of the road, and then it stopped. Not faded, not dispersed, just stopped. Like it had reached a boundary. Then it disappeared. Instantly, I stared at the spot where it had been. Nothing. Just the empty road. I checked the time. 12:27 a.m. I remember that clearly. I sat there for a few seconds, engine still running. Then I drove forward, slowly, past the exact spot where it had vanished. Nothing happened, no feeling, no change. Just normal road. I picked up speed again, wanting to get out of that stretch. But about another minute down, there it was again, this time closer, right in front of me. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to. The car slowed quickly. The cloud was already crossing, same direction, same steady movement. But this time, it looked denser, more defined. I could see the edges clearly, too clearly, like it had shape but not a fixed one. I didn't stop completely this time, just crept forward. The headlights filled it, and for a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a shape, more like a distortion, like the air within it wasn't behaving the same as the air outside. I drove into it again, same result. Gone. No impact, no residue, nothing. I checked the windshield again, still clean. I wiped it with my hand anyway, nothing there. I looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty again, no sign of the cloud. I didn't stop after that, just kept driving, but I kept checking the road ahead, waiting to see it again. It didn't show up. The rest of the drive was normal. I got home around 12:45, parked the car, sat there for a minute before getting out, just listening. Everything felt normal again. No wind, no strange movement. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. Didn't sleep much. The next day I checked the car. Windshield was spotless, no marks anywhere. I even drove that same road again later. Daylight this time. Nothing unusual, just hedges and tarmac. But now, whenever I drive at night, I find myself watching the road a bit more closely, especially in the headlights, because sometimes, just for a second, I think I see something drifting across. I noticed it before I was fully awake. That half-asleep state where you're aware of something, but not thinking clearly yet. I was lying on my back, just staring into that darkness you get with your eyes closed, when I saw the glow. It wasn't bright, just a faint pulsing behind my eyelids. Slow, steady, like something was lighting up and dimming somewhere nearby. At first, I thought it was a car passing outside. Headlights through the curtains, that kind of thing. Happens all the time where I live, but this wasn't moving. It didn't sweep across, it just pulsed. On, off, on, off. I stayed still, trying to figure out if I was dreaming. The timing was too regular, too consistent. I opened my eyes. The room was completely dark. No light coming through the curtains, no glow anywhere, just the usual outline of the wardrobe and the door. But my ears, they felt pressurized, like when you go up a hill too fast or a plane changes altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I lay there for a few seconds, listening. No sound, no hum, nothing outside, just silence. I closed my eyes again. The glow was still there. Same rhythm, slow pulse, on, off. I opened them again. Dark. Nothing. That's when it started to bother me. I pushed myself up slightly, resting on my elbows. The pressure in my ears stayed, not painful, just noticeable. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up, 2:14 a.m. I remember that clearly. The light from the screen didn't affect the glow. When I closed my eyes again, it was still there. Same pattern. I sat up fully, swung my legs out of bed. The floor felt colder than usual. I stood there for a second, trying to listen for anything. Nothing. I walked over to the window, pulled the curtain back slightly. Street outside was empty, no cars, no lights. I let the curtain fall back, turned toward the room. Everything looked normal. I closed my eyes again. The glow was stronger, not brighter exactly, just more defined. The pulses felt closer together. I opened my eyes quickly. Dark, same as before. I rubbed my face, trying to wake myself up properly. Maybe it was just my eyes adjusting, or something internal. I'd had migraines before that started with weird visual stuff, but this didn't feel like that. I sat back down on the bed, closed my eyes again. The glow shifted, not position, just timing. The pulses sped up slightly. I felt the pressure in my ears increase at the same time. I swallowed again. Still there. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore it, but it was hard to ignore. Every time I blinked, even with my eyes open, I could still see it faintly, like it was bleeding through. I turned onto my side, closed my eyes. The glow was still centered, didn't move with me. That didn't make sense. I sat up again, heart rate picking up slightly. Not panic, just that feeling that something wasn't right. I looked at the clock again, 2:14. It hadn't changed. I frowned, waited a few seconds. It ticked to 2:15. Normal. I lay back again, closed my eyes. The glow was still there. Now it felt closer, like it wasn't just behind my eyelids anymore. More present. I opened my eyes. The room looked the same, but the darkness felt different, hard to explain, like it had depth. I sat up again, this time more quickly. The pressure in my ears peaked for a second, then held. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, walked slowly toward the middle of the room. The floor creaked slightly under my weight. That sounded normal, but everything else felt muted, like the sound didn't travel properly. I closed my eyes again. The glow pulsed. Faster now. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. I opened my eyes, and for a split second, I thought I saw something in the room. Not a shape, just a slight shift in the darkness. Then it was gone. I stood there, not moving, trying to focus. Nothing. Just the same outlines. I checked the time again, 2:17. That didn't seem right. It felt like less time had passed. I went back to the bed and sat down, closed my eyes one more time. The glow was still there, but it was fading, not in brightness, in clarity, like it was becoming harder to focus on. The pulses slowed, on, off, longer gaps between. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I lay back down, opened my eyes. The room looked normal again. Flat darkness, no depth, no movement. I stayed there for a while, just listening. Everything sounded normal. Distant traffic, a faint noise from the pipes. I checked the time one last time. 2:19. I must have fallen asleep after that, because the next thing I remember was my alarm going off. Morning light through the curtains, everything normal, no pressure, no glow. I got up, went about my day, tried not to think about it too much. But that night, when I lay down, I caught myself closing my eyes slower than usual, just to see if that faint pulsing would come back. I was about 40 minutes into the drive when it happened. Middle of nowhere, just that long stretch of road between Hexham and Kielder where you don't see another car for ages. It had been raining earlier, not heavy, just enough to leave the road slick and reflective. By the time I was out there, it had mostly stopped, just the occasional drop hitting the windshield. I remember because I had the wipers off, and I hate that squeaky half-dry wipe sound. I was doing maybe 50, not in a rush. No music on, just the engine and that low hum you get when you're driving at night too long. My headlights were cutting straight down the road, picking up the edges of the trees and the white lines. Then for a second, literally a second, I thought it had started raining again. Except it didn't look right. The drops in the headlights, they weren't falling down, they were going up. It was like the air in front of the car filled with these thin streaks, like rain, but every single one of them was rising. Fast, too. Like gravity was flipped just in that one patch. I blinked, and it was gone. Just empty road again. Dry. I actually slowed down a bit after that, because I thought maybe I'd zoned out or something. Like my eyes had adjusted weird, or I'd hit a weird patch of mist. I even leaned forward a bit, trying to see if there was something in the air I'd missed. Nothing. I told myself it was just tiredness. I'd been up since early morning, long day, that kind of thing. But then I started noticing other stuff. Not right away. It kind of crept in. The first thing was the sound. It took me a minute to realize what was off about it. The car sounded duller, like someone had turned down the volume on everything. The engine, the tires on the road, it was all still there, just muted. At first I thought maybe I'd gone onto a different kind of asphalt, but when I looked at the road, it hadn't changed. I cracked the window a bit. No wind. That was weird on its own. I was moving, not slow either, but there was no air pushing in. It just felt still, like the air outside wasn't reacting to the car at all. I closed the window again. I kept driving. Then I noticed the trees. They weren't moving. There wasn't much wind that night anyway. But even then, you usually see something. A bit of sway, leaves flickering in the headlights. These just stood there, completely still, like cutouts. I remember thinking, this is stupid. Just drive. Don't overthink it. But I started gripping the wheel tighter without realizing it. A few minutes later, I saw it again. Same thing. The rain. This time, it was off to the right side of the road. My headlights caught it just at the edge, thin lines shooting upward, like the ground was pulling them in reverse. I turned my head to look properly. Gone. The second my eyes landed on it, it stopped. That was the first time I felt that weird drop in my stomach. Not panic, just something wasn't lining up. I checked the time on the dashboard, 11:18 p.m. I remember that clearly because I kept checking it after. I drove on, a bit slower now, maybe 40. That's when the radio cut in. I hadn't had it on at all. I always drive in silence at night, but suddenly there was this low crackle, like static trying to tune itself. I didn't touch anything. It flickered on for maybe 2 seconds. No music, just this faint hiss and a kind of pulsing tone underneath it. Then it cut back out. I stared at the console for a second, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. I told myself it was electrical, old car, wet weather, something like that. Still didn't feel right. A couple minutes after that, I noticed something ahead. At first, I thought it was another car, way in the distance, just a faint light above the road, but it wasn't in the right place. It was too high, and it wasn't moving. I kept driving toward it, trying to figure out what it was. A reflection, maybe? Something on a hill? But as I got closer, it didn't change size the way it should have. It just stayed there, a small, steady glow, hanging above the road, not bright, more like a dull white, almost gray. I slowed down more, maybe 30 now. The air still felt wrong, quiet, like everything was padded. Then my headlights hit that rain again. This time it filled the whole road, upward streaks all around like I was driving into a reverse downpour. I instinctively flinched like I was about to hit something, and then nothing. Clear again. But something else changed. The light ahead was gone. Just gone. I checked the time again. 11:18 p.m. Same as before. I frowned at that, because I knew more than a few minutes had passed. At least 5, maybe 10. I tapped the dashboard like that would fix it. The seconds ticked over normally, 11:19. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then I noticed the road. I didn't recognize it. Same type of road, same trees, but not the same stretch. I'd driven that route enough times to know the bends, the landmarks. There should have been a turnoff to the left by then. A little sign, barely visible. It wasn't there. I kept driving, trying to tell myself I'd just lost track of distance. That's when I saw something on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a person. Tall shape, just at the edge of the trees. My headlights only caught part of it. I slowed down even more, trying to get a better look. It didn't move. It wasn't facing me. At least I don't think it was. It was just there. Upright, still. As I got closer, the shape didn't get clearer. That was the weird part. Usually things come into focus under headlights. You start to see details. This didn't. It stayed kind of flat, like a shadow that didn't match the lighting. I didn't stop. No chance. I kept my eyes forward, but I could see it in the edge of my vision as I passed. And right as it slipped out of view, the radio crackled again. Same hiss, same low tone, louder this time. I glanced down for half a second. When I looked back up, something was in the road. I hit the brakes. Hard. The car skidded slightly on the wet surface, but stopped. There was nothing there, just empty road. But I knew I'd seen something. Not a shape exactly. More like the air had shifted, like heat haze, but thicker. It had been right in front of the car. I sat there for a few seconds, hands tight on the wheel, heart going faster than I liked. The radio was still making that noise. Then it cut out again. Silence. I looked at the time, 11:32 p.m. That didn't make sense either. I'd only been stopped for a few seconds. I didn't want to sit there any longer. I drove, didn't care about speed anymore. I just kept going until I saw something familiar. Eventually, I did. A sign, then a bend I recognized. Everything started to feel normal again. The sound of the engine came back properly. The trees moved slightly in the wind. The air felt like air again. By the time I got home, it was 12:07. I checked the route later. There's no missing section like that, no long stretch where you can lose 20 minutes without noticing. And I went back the next day. Same road, same time, more or less. Nothing. No lights, no shapes, no weird silence, just a normal drive. But twice since then, I've seen it again. That upward rain, always just for a second, and always when there's no wind. I noticed it because the ceiling didn't match the rest of the room. I'd been lying there for a while, not really asleep, just staring up in the dark. It was one of those nights where your brain won't switch off, so you just end up watching nothing. At some point, I realized there was a small patch of light above me. Not bright, just slightly brighter than everything else. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were adjusting or I'd caught some reflection from outside. But the rest of the ceiling stayed dark. Only that one spot had a faint glow. I shifted my head slightly on the pillow. The spot didn't move, it stayed fixed in place. I frowned and propped myself up on my elbows. The glow was circular, not perfectly sharp, but clearly defined, about the size of a dinner plate. I glanced toward the window. The curtains were fully closed, no light coming through, no gaps. I looked back at the ceiling. The glow was still there, same size, same intensity. "All right," I said quietly. I reached over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand, turning the screen on just enough to see the time, 2:48 a.m. I turned the screen off again. The room dropped back into darkness, except for that spot. I stared at it. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse, just sat there. I pushed myself up a bit more, sitting against the headboard now. The angle changed slightly. The glow stayed in the same place on the ceiling. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor felt cold under my feet. I took a few slow steps toward the center of the room, keeping my eyes on it. The glow didn't change, didn't get brighter or dimmer as I moved. It wasn't reacting to me at all. I stopped directly under it, looked straight up. The edges were soft, blended slightly into the darker ceiling around it, but it was definitely there. I raised my hand slowly, held it up into the light. Nothing happened, no shadow. That's what made me pause. Even a faint light should cast something. My hand just looked the same, dark, flat. I lowered it again. My chest felt tight. I glanced back at the window. Still closed, no change. I looked around the room, nothing else out of place, just that one spot. I stepped back slightly, putting some distance between me and it. The glow stayed unchanged. I stood there for a minute, just watching. Then it shifted. Not position, size. It got smaller, slowly. Almost too slowly to notice at first, but it was definitely shrinking. The edges pulled inward, the circle tightened. I felt that pressure in my ears again. Subtle, but there. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I took a step closer again. The glow kept shrinking. Same steady pace, no flicker, no change in brightness, just less of it. I found myself holding my breath without meaning to, watching it, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. It kept getting smaller, from dinner plate size to something like a bowl, then smaller. A plate, a saucer. I stepped back again. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. I didn't take my eyes off it. It continued to shrink, now about the size of my hand. The edges were still soft, still blending into the ceiling, but the center looked slightly more intense now. Not brighter exactly, just more focused. I felt a slight warmth on my face, barely noticeable, like standing near something that had just been warm. I raised my hand again, held it up toward the spot. Still no shadow. I pulled my hand back. The glow kept shrinking, now down to the size of a coin. My heart was beating faster now. I could feel it in my chest, in my throat. The pressure in my ears built again, slightly stronger this time. Then it stopped for a second, just a tiny point of light on the ceiling, perfectly still. Then it faded, not quickly, just gone, like it had never been there. The ceiling returned to complete darkness. I stood there, staring at the spot, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. The pressure in my ears disappeared. The room felt normal again. Quiet, still. I stayed standing there for a while, then slowly went back to the bed, sat down, looked up again. Nothing. I lay back down, staring at the same spot, trying to convince myself it had been some kind of light from outside, a reflection. But it hadn't behaved like that. It hadn't moved with me. It hadn't cast anything. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember, it was morning. Light coming through the curtains, normal daylight. I got up and looked at the ceiling straight away. Nothing unusual, just plain white. No marks, no discoloration. I stood on the bed and reached up, running my hand over the exact spot where the glow had been. The surface felt normal, smooth, cold. I stepped down and just stood there for a second, looking up. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever that light had been, it hadn't come from outside the room. I felt it before I saw anything, that sudden pressure in your ears, like when a plane changes altitude. It came on all at once while I was just standing there. I stopped mid-step, swallowed. It didn't go away. I tilted my head slightly, trying to clear it. Still there. I looked around. Nothing obvious had changed. I was standing in a small field just behind my house, near a line of trees that separates the back of the estate from open land. It was late, maybe around 11 p.m. No one else out, just me. I'd come out for a walk because I couldn't sleep. The night had been still, now it felt off. I swallowed again. The pressure stayed, not painful, just present, like something had shifted in the air. I took a slow breath and looked up. At first I didn't see anything, just a dark sky, thin clouds drifting slowly. Then I noticed it, a dim light, high above, moving. Not fast, not slow, just a steady drift. It wasn't blinking, wasn't bright, just a soft, dull glow. I frowned slightly. Satellite, I said under my breath, but it didn't look like one. It wasn't sharp, didn't have that clean pinpoint look. This was softer, like it had edges that didn't quite hold. I kept watching it. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again. It didn't help. The light continued drifting. No sound. No change in speed. I took a few steps forward without thinking, keeping my eyes on it. The field felt quieter now. The usual distant sounds had dropped away. No cars, no wind, just that stillness. I stopped again. The light moved directly overhead. I squinted, trying to make out any detail. There wasn't any. No shape, just the glow. It didn't illuminate anything. The clouds around it stayed dark. It was like the light was contained within itself. I felt that tightness in my chest again. I shifted my weight slightly. The grass under my feet barely made a sound. Too quiet. I looked around briefly. The trees at the edge of the field were still, completely still. I looked back up. The light had slowed. Not by much, just enough to notice. Then it stopped, right above me. No drift, no movement, just there. I held my breath. The pressure in my ears peaked, a dull, steady sensation. I felt it in my jaw now, my chest. I didn't move. Didn't want to. The light stayed fixed, unchanging. Then slowly, it started moving again, but not across the sky. It drifted upward, straight up, the same steady motion. No acceleration, no change in brightness, just rising. I turned slightly, following it with my eyes. It continued, higher, further. The pressure in my ears eased slightly as it moved away. I exhaled slowly. The light kept going. Then gradually it faded, not flickering, not blinking, just less, until it was gone. I stood there for a few seconds, looking at the empty sky. Nothing replaced it. No other movement, no sound. Then the pressure disappeared completely. All at once, like it had never been there. I swallowed again. My ears felt normal. The air felt normal. The distant sounds came back. Faint traffic, a dog barking somewhere far off. I looked around. Everything was the same. The field, the trees, nothing out of place. I stayed there for a minute longer, then turned and walked back toward the house. I didn't look up again, just kept my eyes on the ground, the grass, the path. Something solid. When I got to the back door, I stopped for a second, hand on the handle. I glanced up once more. The sky was empty, just clouds, nothing else. I went inside, closed the door behind me. The house felt normal, quiet, still. But as I stood there, I had this lingering thought that whatever I'd seen hadn't been passing over. It had stopped because I was underneath it. The power went out without any warning. 1 second I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug. The next, everything just dropped. Lights, fridge, the low hum of the house, all gone at once. It was already dark outside. Late evening, maybe around 9:30. The kind of damp, overcast night where the clouds sit low and you don't see any stars. I stood there for a second, hands still under the tap, waiting for something to click back on. Nothing did. Great, I muttered, turning the tap off. The silence settled in pretty quickly. Not total silence, there was still the faint sound of rain against the windows, but everything inside felt empty. I walked into the hallway and grabbed my phone off the table. No signal. That didn't happen often where I lived, just outside a small village near Durham. Usually, even during outages, the signal held. I frowned and held the phone up, like that might help. Still nothing. I turned on the flashlight and headed toward the front room. The beam felt narrow, like it wasn't reaching as far as it should. Probably just the darkness making it seem that way. I pulled the curtain back slightly and looked outside. The whole street was dark. No house lights, no street lamps, just silhouettes of cars and rooftops against the low clouds. I could hear a few distant voices, people stepping outside, calling to each other. I watched for a minute, then stepped back. The air inside felt cooler already without the heating. I decided to go out and check if anyone knew what was going on. I grabbed a jacket and stepped onto the front path. The rain was light but steady. A couple of neighbors were outside. Mrs. Clark from 2 doors down stood under her porch talking to someone across the street. "Power's out your side too?" she called. "Yeah," I said. "Any idea why?" "Not a clue. Must be the whole area." I nodded and stepped further out onto the pavement. The sky looked strange, not in a dramatic way, just heavier. The clouds were low, thick, but there was something about the way they sat that felt off. I glanced up again, longer this time. That's when I noticed the glow. It was faint, really faint, but it was there. A soft light behind the clouds, spreading out unevenly. At first I thought it might be the city, light pollution pushing through the cloud cover. But it didn't look like that. It wasn't orange. It was pale, almost white, but slightly off. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The glow stayed steady for a few seconds. Then it shifted. Not across the sky, within the clouds, like something moving behind them, but without a clear shape. I took a step forward without realizing it. "Do you see that?" I asked, half turning toward Mrs. Clark. She looked up briefly. "See what?" "That light." She squinted for a moment, then shook her head. "Just clouds." I looked back up. The glow was still there, still faint, but more noticeable now that I was focused on it. The rain seemed to soften, not stop, just less. The street felt quieter. The voices faded. I realized I couldn't hear anyone talking anymore. I glanced around. People were still there. Mrs. Clark was still on her porch, but no one was speaking. Or if they were, I couldn't hear it. I turned back to the sky. The glow spread slightly, like it was filling more of the cloud cover. It didn't brighten, just expanded. The edges of it were soft, blending into the darker clouds around it. I felt that same pressure in my ears again, not painful, just noticeable, like being in a plane before your ears adjust. I swallowed. It didn't help. The glow shifted again. This time it seemed to move upward, not in a straight line, more like it was pulling away. The clouds above it thinned slightly, just enough to show a darker layer beyond. I stood there, watching, trying to understand what I was looking at. There was no shape, no clear source, just that pale light moving behind the cloud layer. Then it started to fade, slowly, evenly, like someone dimming it down. The pressure in my ears eased slightly as it did. The rain picked up again. I heard voices return. Probably just the grid, someone was saying. I blinked. The glow was almost gone now, just a faint hint left in the clouds. Then it disappeared completely. The sky went back to its normal dark gray. A second later, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Then the houses, lights coming back through windows. A low hum returned as things powered up. I stood there for a second longer, looking up. Nothing unusual, just clouds. "Back on," Mrs. Clark called. "Yeah," I said, still staring at the sky. I went back inside. The house felt normal again, warm, familiar. I put my phone on the table. Signal bars came back immediately. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, replaying what I'd seen, trying to match it to something normal. Lightning, maybe, but it hadn't flashed, hadn't been sharp or sudden. It had moved, slowly. I shook my head and turned the kettle on. As it started to heat, I glanced out the window one more time. The clouds were still low, still thick, but there was no sign of that glow anymore, just darkness. I went out to check the south gate a little after midnight. It wasn't unusual. If the wind picked up, that gate sometimes rattled loose, and I'd learned not to ignore it. The field stretched out behind the house, open and flat, with a low fence line running along the edge. That night was cold but dry. No wind. The kind of still that makes everything feel sharper. You could hear small things carry further than they should. I grabbed a torch on the way out, but didn't switch it on right away. There was enough light from the yard lamp behind me and the faint glow of the sky. The gravel crunched under my boots as I crossed the yard. The livestock were in the field to the left. A few cattle spread out near the fence. I glanced over at them as I walked. They were standing, all of them, not lying down, just standing still. I slowed slightly. It wasn't unheard of for them to stand like that, but usually there'd be some movement. One shifting, another turning its head. These weren't. They were all facing the same direction, toward the far side of the field. I stopped for a second, watching. None of them reacted to me. No heads lifting, no ears twitching, nothing. I felt a slight unease then, but I pushed it aside and kept walking. The gate was about 50 meters out, where the fence met the corner of the field. As I got closer, I noticed the glow. It was low to the ground, maybe a foot or two above it. Pale. Not bright enough to light up the whole field, but enough to stand out against the dark. At first, I thought it might be someone out there with a light, maybe a neighbor or someone checking their own fence line. But there was no beam, no movement, just that steady, soft glow. I stopped again. The silence felt heavier out there than it had in the yard. I realized I couldn't hear anything. No insects, no distant road noise, not even the usual low sounds from the cattle. I turned slightly, looking back at them. They were still in the same positions, completely still, facing the glow. I swallowed and switched the torch on. The beam cut across the field, landing near the glow. It didn't touch it. The light from the torch just stopped short, like it didn't reach as far as it should have. I frowned and stepped forward. The crunch of my boots sounded dull now, like it was being absorbed instead of echoing. The glow stayed where it was. It didn't react to the torch, didn't flicker, didn't change. I moved closer, about 20 meters away now. The ground beneath the glow looked different, darker, not muddy, just less textured, like the grass had been flattened or smoothed out. I aimed the torch directly at it. The beam passed over the area but didn't seem to illuminate it properly. The edges of the light blurred. I lowered the torch slightly. My hand felt strange. There was a faint tingling in my fingers. I flexed them. The feeling stayed. I took another step. The air changed, subtle at first, then more noticeable. Warmer, not enough to be comfortable, just enough to be wrong for that kind of night. I stopped. The glow pulsed once, soft. I felt it in my chest. A quick tightening, then release. My ears popped, sharp, I winced and swallowed. The pressure stayed. I shifted my weight. My boots pressed into the ground. It felt off, softer than it should have been. I looked down. The grass beneath my feet looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. I took another step forward. The warmth increased slightly. The tingling in my hands spread up my wrists. The glow didn't move. It just hovered there, steady. I glanced back at the cattle again. Still nothing, no movement, no reaction. They might as well have been statues. I felt a pull then. Not physical, just a sense that I should keep moving forward, like my body wanted to close the distance. I stopped, planted my feet. The feeling didn't go away. I raised the torch again. The beam wavered slightly as my hand shook. For a second, I thought I saw something inside the glow. Not a shape, just a darker area, like something passing behind it. Then it was gone. The glow returned to being uniform. My chest tightened again, stronger this time. I took a step back. The pull eased slightly. The warmth dropped. I took another step back. The tingling started to fade. The glow pulsed again, sharper. The pressure in my ears increased. A high ringing sound cut through the silence. I turned. Without thinking, just turned and started walking back toward the yard. The crunch of my boots returned slowly. At first muted, then clearer with each step. The warmth faded. The air cooled again. The ringing in my ears softened. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the yard. When I did, the glow was gone. The field was dark again, normal. The cattle shifted slightly. One of them lowered its head. Another took a step. The usual small movements came back. The silence lifted. I stood there for a second, breathing, trying to steady myself. Then I walked back to the house. I didn't check the gate. I told myself I would in the morning. Inside, everything felt normal. Warm, quiet. I set the torch down on the table. My hands still felt slightly off, like they hadn't fully woken up. I checked the time, 12:48. That didn't seem right. I'd gone out just after midnight. It hadn't felt like nearly an hour. I went to bed not long after. Sleep came, but it wasn't deep. I woke up a few times during the night, each time with that same faint pressure in my chest before it faded. In the morning, I went straight out to the field. The gate was open, wide, not broken, not damaged, just unlatched and swung inward. I stood there for a while looking at it. The latch was the kind you had to lift and turn. It didn't just come loose on its own. I walked out into the field. The grass near the gate looked normal. No marks, no flattened areas, nothing out of place. I looked toward where the glow had been. Nothing there, just the field, flat and quiet under the morning light. The cattle were grazing normally, moving, reacting like nothing had happened. I walked back to the gate and closed it, made sure the latch was secure, tested it twice. Then I stood there for a second longer before heading back. Since then, I checked that gate earlier before it gets fully dark. I don't go out there after midnight anymore if I can avoid it, especially on nights when the air feels too still. It was just after 11:30 when I got to the station. Not a big one, just a single platform on the edge of town, concrete slab, one glass shelter, and a ticket machine that only worked half the time. The line ran through a stretch of open fields before curving toward the city, so once you stepped out there at night, it felt more isolated than it actually was. I'd taken that train plenty of times. Last one of the night was scheduled for 11:47. If you missed it, you were stuck until morning. No buses, no taxis unless you booked ahead, which I hadn't. The platform was empty when I got there. No surprise, it usually was that late. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting that dull yellow glow that never quite reaches the ground evenly. I sat down on the metal bench inside the shelter, pulled my jacket tighter, and checked my phone. 11:34. Cold, but not freezing. There was a thin layer of fog sitting low over the tracks, drifting in slow, uneven patches. You could see the rails disappear into it about 50 yards out. I remember noticing how quiet it was. No wind, no cars from the nearby road, not even insects, just that faint electrical hum from the lights overhead. I stood up after a few minutes and walked closer to the edge of the platform, hands in my pockets, just staring down the tracks, waiting for that distant glow you usually see before the train rounds the bend. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was the train. It was in the right direction, low and centered over the tracks, but it didn't move. It just hovered there, maybe 30 or 40 feet beyond where the fog thickened. Soft white, not bright like a headlight, more like a diffused glow, like a bulb wrapped in frosted glass. No beam, no glare. I leaned forward a little, squinting, trying to make out a shape behind it. There wasn't one, just the light. I checked my phone again. 11:39, still a few minutes early. I figured maybe the train had stopped further down the line for some reason, or there was another train on the track, but there should have been sound. You can hear those things long before you see them. The rails hum. The ground vibrates a little. There was nothing. I stepped closer to the edge of the platform, like maybe a foot or two from the drop to the tracks. The fog shifted slightly, and the light seemed to sharpen for a second, like it was coming into focus. That's when the silence changed. It didn't get quieter. It just cut, like someone had flipped a switch on the world. The hum from the overhead lights vanished. The faint ringing in my ears, gone. Even my own breathing sounded muffled, like I had cotton in my ears. I blinked a few times, swallowed, tried to clear my ears. Nothing changed. The light hadn't moved. It felt closer now. Not physically, but in a way I can't really explain, like it was pressing into the space between me and it. I had this sudden, stupid thought that I shouldn't be standing that close to the edge. I took a step back. The moment I did, I felt something in my arms, a low, buzzing sensation, starting at my wrists and moving up toward my elbows. Not painful, just there. Like holding onto something vibrating, except I wasn't holding anything. I looked down at my hands. They looked normal, no shaking, no discoloration. When I looked back up, the light was still there, same size, same position. I tried to take a step back again, but my legs didn't move right away. Not frozen, just slow to respond, like there was a delay between thinking and doing. The buzzing in my arms got a little stronger. I remember thinking I should say something. Call out, ask if someone was there, but the idea of making noise felt wrong, like it didn't belong in that moment. Then, sound came back, not gradually, all at once. The overhead lights buzzed again. The distant hum of the town came back. I heard my own breath, sharp and uneven, and the train was already there, right in front of me. The doors were closing. I jumped back instinctively as it pulled away from the platform, metal wheels screeching lightly against the rails. It was moving slow at first, then picking up speed as it passed me, carriage after carriage sliding by. I stood there, confused, trying to piece it together. I hadn't heard it arrive. I hadn't seen it approach. I hadn't seen anyone get on or off. I checked my phone, 12:21. I just stared at it for a second, waiting for it to change, like it was glitching. It didn't. I went into the call history, the messages, anything that might show I'd been distracted. Nothing. No missed calls, no notifications. The screen time showed no activity for the last 40 minutes. I looked back down the tracks. The light was gone. The fog had thinned out, drifting off to the sides. The rails stretched out empty into the distance. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, hoping maybe I just missed it somehow and another train would come. I knew it wouldn't. That was the last one. Eventually, I walked home, took the long way, sticking to the lit streets. When I got back, I checked the train schedule online. It showed the 11:47 departure marked as on time. No delays, no early arrival, just normal. The next night, I went back to the station around the same time. I told myself I just wanted to prove to myself it was nothing, that I'd zoned out, lost track of time. Everything was normal. Lights buzzing, distant cars. The train came in loud and obvious, headlights cutting through the dark long before it reached the platform. But I still stood a little further back from the edge, and I kept looking down the tracks, waiting for that soft white glow to show up again. I was the last one in the office that night. It wasn't unusual. I handled end-of-day reports, and sometimes that pushed me past midnight. Most people cleared out by 6. Cleaning staff came through around 9, and after that, the whole floor was empty. The building was 12 stories, all glass on one side facing the city. My desk sat about 10 feet back from the windows, with a clear view across the skyline. It was late enough that most of the surrounding buildings had gone dark. A few scattered lights here and there, but nothing moving. I remember checking the time before it started. 11:52. I was halfway through a spreadsheet, nothing complicated, just repetitive. The only sounds were the low hum of the air system and the faint whir from the computers. Everything felt normal. Then I noticed the reflection. At first, I thought it was something behind me, a light moving across the office floor, maybe from the hallway. I turned around, nothing. The lights in the office were steady, no one there. I turned back to the windows. That's when I saw it. A faint glow. Outside. Moving slowly past the glass. It wasn't bright, just enough to stand out against the darkness. Pale white, slightly diffused, like it didn't have a solid edge. I frowned and leaned forward a bit. We were 12 floors up. There shouldn't have been anything that close to the building. No cranes, no platforms, nothing that could hover at that height. The glow continued moving. Smooth. Steady. Not rising or falling, just sliding along the outside of the building, level with the floor I was on. I stood up, walked closer to the windows. The city below was still. Cars moved far beneath, tiny and distant. Nothing near the building itself. I looked directly out, trying to see what could be causing it. There was nothing there, but in the reflection, it was clear. Moving past. I glanced down at the glass itself, trying to catch the source at an angle. Still nothing. Just the reflection. The air in the office felt different, subtle at first, then more noticeable, heavier, like the space had thickened slightly. I swallowed. My ears popped. I rubbed my jaw, trying to clear the pressure. It didn't go away right away. The hum of the air system faded, not completely, just reduced, like someone had turned the volume down. I looked back at the glow. It slowed, not by much, but enough that I noticed. It was almost directly in front of me now. The reflection showed it clearly, hovering just beyond the glass. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it, not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending. I stepped closer. The glass felt cool under my hand. The glow pulsed once. Soft, barely noticeable. My fingers tingled where they touched the window. I pulled my hand back. The tingling stayed. I looked around the office. Everything seemed slightly off. The edges of desks, the lines of the floor, nothing had moved, but it all felt less solid. The glow outside dimmed slightly, then brightened again. The pressure in my ears increased. Sharp. I winced and swallowed again. My chest felt tight. Breathing took more effort. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the sound didn't come out right. Flat, muted, like it didn't belong in the room. The glow drifted forward again, still smooth, still silent. Then it stopped, right in front of the window. The reflection showed it hovering there, steady. The distortion inside it seemed stronger now, more pronounced, like something was just out of focus. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then everything went quiet, completely. The air system stopped, the computers went silent, no hum, no background noise at all, just that glow and the pressure in my ears. I blinked. The glow pulsed again, stronger this time. For a second, I thought the glass itself shifted, not physically, just the way it reflected the light. Then, everything snapped back, all at once. The computers beeped, the monitors went black, then rebooted, every single one. Across the floor, the air system kicked in again. The hum returned, loud and sudden. I flinched, looked back at the window. The glow was gone, no fade, no movement away, just gone. The glass showed only the dark city outside. I stood there trying to catch up. The computers around me continued restarting, screens lighting up one by one. The usual startup sounds filled the room. I looked down at my own monitor. It was rebooting too. The spreadsheet was gone, unsaved. I checked the time on my phone. 12:37. I stared at it. There was no way that much time had passed. It had felt like minutes, maybe less. I walked slowly back to my desk and sat down. My hands still tingled slightly. Not strong, just enough to notice. The office felt normal again, everything in place. But I kept looking at the windows, expecting something else to move past them. Nothing did. When the computers finished rebooting, everything looked normal. No error messages, no sign anything had happened. I stayed a bit longer than I needed to, just sitting there, watching the glass. Eventually, I packed up and left. The hallway lights felt too bright, too normal. Now, whenever I work late, I keep my desk light on and the blinds half closed. Not all the way, just enough that I don't have to see the reflection clearly. I leave for work at the same time every morning. 5:10, give or take a minute. It's early enough that the roads are mostly empty, especially where I live. Edge of an industrial estate with long stretches of warehouses and fenced yards. It was late February, still dark at that hour. Not pitch black, but that deep pre-dawn blue where everything looks flat and slightly off. No frost that morning, just cold and dry. I'd driven that route so many times I didn't really think about it anymore. Same turns, same timing. There's a stretch about 10 minutes in where the road runs alongside a row of industrial yards, big fenced-off lots with stacked pallets, containers, that sort of thing. Normally, it's dead quiet. No lights except the occasional security lamp. That morning, I noticed something different before I even reached the yard. The radio cut out. Not completely, just dropped to a low hiss for a second, then came back. I glanced at the dashboard, thinking maybe I'd brushed the volume or something. Everything looked normal. I kept driving. A few seconds later, it happened again. This time the dashboard lights dimmed slightly at the same time. Not off, just dipped, like the power had been pulled back for a second. Then everything returned to normal. I frowned, tapped the steering wheel lightly. The car's not new, but it's never had electrical issues. I slowed a little, just in case. As I came up alongside the first yard, I saw the light. It was low, much lower than anything that should have been in the air, hovering just above the fence line, maybe 10 feet up, sitting over the center of the yard. At first, I thought it was one of those portable work lights, the kind they set up on sites, but this wasn't fixed to the ground. It was just there. A soft white glow, not harsh, but bright enough to clearly outline the tops of the containers beneath it. No beam, no source I could see, just a solid contained light. I slowed further, my foot easing off the accelerator without really thinking about it. The road was empty, no cars behind me, none coming the other way. I glanced at the yard itself. No movement, no workers, no vehicles, just that light hovering in place. Then the dashboard dimmed again. More noticeably this time, the radio dropped to silence. Not static, nothing. The engine kept running, but it sounded distant, like it was coming from further away than it should have. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The air inside the car felt heavier, not stuffy, just thick. My ears popped. I swallowed, but the pressure stayed. I looked back at the light. It hadn't moved, but it felt closer. Not physically, not in distance, just more present. Like it was pushing into the space around it. The edges of it looked strange. Not sharp, like not blurred. More like the air around it was shifting slightly, bending in a way that didn't match the rest of the scene. I realized I was drifting toward the edge of the road and corrected the wheel. The steering felt slightly delayed, like there was a fraction of a second between input and response. I eased off the gas completely. The car slowed, rolling forward. The dashboard lights dimmed again, lower this time. The digital clock flickered. For a second, it showed nothing at all, then came back. I glanced at it. 5:22. That didn't seem right. I'd left at 5:10. The yard was about 10 minutes away, but it hadn't felt like 12 minutes had passed. It had felt like 5. I looked back up at the light. For a second, I thought I saw something beneath it, not clearly, just a darker shape, like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Then it shifted, or I blinked, and it was gone. The light pulsed once. Subtle, but enough to notice. The pressure in my ears increased, sharp enough that I winced. My fingers tingled on the wheel. The car kept rolling forward, slow, steady. I remember thinking I should stop, just pull over, figure out what was happening. But I didn't. I just kept moving. The light stayed where it was. The road curved slightly, bringing me alongside it for a moment longer. Then, everything snapped back. The radio came on full volume for a split second before settling. The dashboard lights brightened, the engine sounded normal again. I blinked. The yard was dark. No light, no glow, nothing. Just the fence, the containers, and the usual security lamp near the gate. I straightened up in my seat. The road ahead looked normal. I drove on, a bit faster now, trying to shake the feeling. A few minutes later, something didn't feel right. The landmarks were off. The turn I usually take, the one that leads toward the motorway, should have been coming up. It wasn't. I kept driving. Another minute passed. Then I saw a sign, one I recognized, but it was further along the route than I should have been. I slowed down, heart starting to pick up. I checked the clock. 5:47. I stared at it. There was no way. I should have been on the motorway by then, halfway to work. Instead, I'd missed my exit completely. I didn't remember passing it. I didn't remember any of the road between the yard and where I was now. I pulled over onto the side of the road and sat there, engine idling. Everything inside the car was normal again. No dimming, no silence, just the usual hum. I looked back in the direction I'd come from. Nothing there, just the road stretching back into the dark. I sat there for a few minutes trying to piece it together, but there was nothing to grab onto. No gap I could feel, no moment where things went blank. Just that light, and then being further down the road than I should have been. Eventually I turned around and drove back to the exit I'd missed. I made it to work late. I didn't mention any of it, but now every time I pass that stretch of road before sunrise, I slow down a little and I look at that yard, just in case the light's there again. I saw it because the light hit it just right. I was driving back from a late shift, taking a stretch of road I don't usually use. It cuts across open farmland, no street lights, just long, straight sections with nothing on either side except low fences and fields. It was around 2 a.m., cold, clear, no wind. The road was empty. I had the headlights on full beam, just letting them stretch out ahead. That's when I caught the reflection. At first, it was just a flicker, a quick glint somewhere above the road. I thought maybe it was a sign, something reflective catching the light at an odd angle. But it wasn't where a sign would be. It was too high. I slowed down a bit, easing off the accelerator. The reflection came again, sharper this time, a dull metallic sheen. Not bright like a mirror, more like something smooth that absorbed some of the light and reflected the rest. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The road ahead was completely empty. No poles, no wires, nothing hanging above it. But the reflection was there. I saw it again, a brief flash, then nothing, then another, like something was shifting slightly, just enough for the headlights to catch it. I slowed down more, down to maybe 35. My grip on the wheel tightened without me realizing it. The reflection came again, longer this time. And I saw the shape, not clearly, just enough to tell it wasn't flat. It was curved, smooth, like the underside of something rounded. No edges I could define, no lights of its own, just that dull surface catching my headlights. I kept moving forward slowly. The angle changed, the reflection slid across it. For a second, the shape became more visible. It wasn't small, it stretched wider than the road. Not massive, but bigger than any drone, bigger than anything that should be just sitting there. And it wasn't moving, it just hung there, perfectly still. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just the sense that what I was looking at didn't make sense. I rolled the window down slightly, cold air rushed in, no sound, no engine noise from above, no wind disturbance, nothing. Just silence. I looked back up, the reflection came again. This time it revealed more of the curve like a shallow arc, smooth all the way across. No seams, no structure I could recognize. Then it tilted, just slightly, a small rotation. Enough that the reflection shifted across it, and then it was gone. Not like it moved away, not like it drifted or sped off. It just went straight up, instantly. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. No blur, no trail, no sound, just empty sky. I flinched and hit the brake harder than I meant to. The car slowed quickly. I came almost to a stop in the middle of the road. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing, just stars. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me harder outside. The air felt still, too still. I looked up again, turning slowly, trying to find any trace of it. Nothing. No movement, no light, no sign anything had been there. I listened. No sound. Even the usual background noise felt absent, like everything had been muted. I stood there for maybe half a minute, just staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal, no warnings. I checked the time. It didn't match. I'd glanced at it a few minutes before. It had been 2:07. Now it read 2:21. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The reflection, the shape, the tilt. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I sat there for a moment longer. Then I started driving again. Slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. No reflections, no shapes. Just empty. I kept glancing up through the windshield. Nothing. No sign of anything above me. The rest of the drive was uneventful. No more strange lights, no missing time I could notice, just the usual road. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine running. I adjusted the rearview mirror without thinking. It felt slightly off, like it wasn't quite aligned the way it should be. I fixed it, or tried to, but it never felt exactly right. I turned the engine off and got out. The air felt normal again. The quiet sounded normal. I looked up one last time. Nothing. Just the night sky. But the image of that shape stayed with me, the way it didn't move like anything I knew, and how it didn't leave. It just stopped being there, like it had only existed while my headlights were on it. I noticed the compass first. It wasn't anything dramatic at the start, just a slight drift, like the needle couldn't quite settle. I'd stopped on the ridge to get my bearings, more out of habit than necessity. The path was pretty clear, just a narrow trail cutting along the top, with a steep drop on one side and a slope of scrub and rock on the other. It was late afternoon when I'd started, but by the time I reached that section, it was getting into dusk. Not dark yet, but the light was fading fast, that dull gray blue you get before everything drops off. I pulled the compass out of my jacket and held it flat. The needle wobbled. I waited. Normally it snaps into place within a second or two. This one kept drifting slightly past north, then easing back, then drifting again. Not spinning. Just off. I frowned and turned my body slightly, thinking maybe I was affecting it somehow. Same thing. I took a step to the side, away from the rocks, held it out again, still drifting. I tapped the casing lightly. The needle flicked, then started its slow, uneven movement again. That's when I started paying attention. Up until then, everything had felt normal. Wind moving across the ridge, distant sounds from the valley below, the usual. But as I stood there, waiting for the compass to settle, I noticed the wind had dropped. Not gradually, just gone. The air felt still. I looked up from the compass. The horizon stretched out ahead, a low line of hills fading into the distance. The sky above it was clear, no clouds, just that dimming light. I looked back down at the compass. The needle had stopped moving, but it wasn't pointing north. It sat slightly off, angled maybe 10 degrees to the right. I turned slowly, trying to align myself with it. The needle didn't correct. It stayed fixed in that wrong position. I felt that quiet tension settle in. Not fear, just something not lining up. I slipped the compass back into my pocket and looked around. The ridge felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, but muted. The distant sounds from the valley were gone. Even my own movement felt softer, like it wasn't carrying as far. I shifted my footing. Loose stones crunched under my boots, but the sound felt dull. I glanced back the way I'd come. The trail was still there, cutting back along the ridge. Nothing out of place. I turned forward again. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a faint glow just above the horizon, barely visible. I narrowed my eyes. The glow wasn't spreading. It wasn't like the last light of the day. It was contained, a small, soft patch hovering just above the line of the hills. I stood still, watching it. It didn't move, didn't change position, just sat there. Then it pulsed, once, slow. The brightness increased slightly, then dropped back down. At the same time, I felt a pressure in my ears, sharp, like when you descend too quickly. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I took a step back. The pressure eased slightly. I stopped, looked at the glow again. It was still there, unchanged. I took another step forward. The pressure came back, stronger. I froze in place, watching. The glow didn't pulse again. It just sat there, faint and steady. I tried to focus on it. The moment I did, it seemed to blur slightly, like it slipped just out of clarity. I blinked, looked slightly to the side. It became more defined again. That made me uneasy in a way I couldn't quite explain. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual up there, but it stood out. I looked at the time. It didn't match what I expected. I was sure I'd only stopped for a minute or two. The phone said nearly 10 minutes had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back up. The glow pulsed again. Once, same as before. A slow increase in brightness, then back down. The pressure in my ears peaked again. Stronger this time. I winced slightly. Then it stopped. The pressure dropped. The glow vanished. Not faded, not moved, just gone. The horizon looked normal again, just a dark line against the dim sky. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting. Nothing came back. The wind picked up again. Light at first, then steady. The distant sounds returned. Faint, but there. I reached for the compass again, pulled it out, held it flat. The needle snapped into place instantly, pointing north, exactly where it should. I turned slowly, checking it against the landscape. Everything lined up. Normal. I looked back at the horizon. Nothing unusual, no glow, no movement, just the fading light. I stood there a moment longer, then started walking again. The rest of the hike down felt normal. The sounds were right, the air felt right. But every now and then I'd glance back toward that part of the horizon. Half expecting to see that glow again, it never came back. But the way the compass had stopped, not spinning, not broken, just fixed in the wrong direction, felt like it had been pointing at something that wasn't there anymore. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. I don't remember waking up gradually. 1 second I was asleep, the next I was alert, like something had just happened and I'd missed it. The room was dark, not pitch black. There was a faint bit of light from outside, enough to make out shapes. The dresser, the door, the edge of the chair in the corner. But the first thing I noticed wasn't what I saw. It was the feeling, like someone had just been in the room. Not in a vague way, specific. Close. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, nothing out of place. But the feeling didn't fade right away. It hung there, like I'd opened my eyes a second too late. I turned my head slowly toward the door. Closed. Exactly how I'd left it. I looked toward the corner. Nothing. The room looked normal. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor was cold. I walked to the door and opened it quietly. The hallway was dark and empty. I listened again. Nothing. No sounds from the rest of the house. I closed the door and leaned against it for a second, trying to shake that feeling. Then I noticed the air. It felt different. Not the whole room, just one part, near the window. I turned and looked. The curtains were still drawn, just slightly parted in the middle like I always leave them. I walked over slowly. The closer I got, the more noticeable it became. The air near the window was warmer, not by much, but enough that it stood out. The rest of the room was cool. That one area wasn't. I held my hand out, hovering just in front of the glass. There it was, a faint pocket of warmth. I moved my hand left. Cool. Right. Cool. Back to the center. Warm again. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. The heating had been off for hours. The window shouldn't have been warm. If anything, it should have been colder. I touched the glass. It felt normal. Cool. But the air just in front of it, that was warmer. Like something had been there, close to it. I stepped back slightly, looking at the curtains. They hadn't moved. No sign they'd been disturbed. I checked the latch, still locked. I pulled the curtain aside a bit and looked out. The street was empty. No lights, no movement. Just the faint outline of parked cars and the road stretching out. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The room felt quieter than it should have. Not silent, just muted, like the usual background noise was missing. I stood there for a minute, listening. Then, slowly, the normal sounds came back. Faint. Distant. The kind of things you don't notice until they're gone. I stepped away from the window. The air felt normal again. I walked around the room, checking everything. Nothing out of place. No signs of anyone being there. I went back to the bed and sat down. Checked my phone. 3:28 a.m. That seemed late, but not unreasonable. I didn't remember waking up before that. Didn't remember any noise or disturbance. I sat there for a bit, thinking. Then I looked back at the window. The warmth was fading. Still there, but less noticeable. I stood up and walked over again. Held my hand out, still warmer than the rest of the room, but cooling, gradually. I waited there, watching it change. After a minute or two, it felt normal again. No difference. Just the same cool air as everywhere else. I stepped back. The feeling that someone had been there started to fade too. Not completely gone, just less immediate. I went back to bed, lay down, staring at the ceiling. I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't feel like I needed to. The room looked the same, but I couldn't shake the sense that I'd missed something, like I'd woken up just after something had happened. Eventually, I closed my eyes again. Sleep came slowly. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same, nothing out of place. I went over to the window, checked it again. The air felt cool, no warmth, no difference. I opened it and leaned out. The outside air felt normal too, nothing unusual. I closed it again. For a moment I just stood there, looking at the glass, trying to picture what it would have looked like from the other side. Then I noticed something small, a faint patch on the glass, barely visible, only at a certain angle, like a smudge. Not shaped like a hand, not anything clear, just an uneven area. right where the warmth had been. I touched it. The glass felt normal, cool. I wiped it with my sleeve. The mark faded, then disappeared. I stood there for a second longer, then stepped back. Everything looked exactly how it should. But that feeling that someone had been there didn't feel like it came from nothing. I woke up already holding my phone. That was the first thing that felt wrong. My hand was wrapped around it like I'd been using it right before falling asleep, but I don't fall asleep like that. I always put it on the nightstand. The screen was on. Dim, but still lit. And warm. Not just slightly warm from being under a blanket. It felt like it had been running for a while. I blinked a couple times, trying to clear my head. The room was still dark. Curtains closed. No light coming in from outside. Just that faint glow from the phone. I lifted it slightly, squinting at the screen. The camera app was open. Rear camera. Pointed toward the window. That's when I sat up. I didn't remember opening the camera. Didn't remember picking the phone up at all. I checked the time, 2:41. I'd gone to bed around midnight. I remembered scrolling for a bit, then putting the phone down. No reason I'd be awake now. I looked back at the camera feed. The image was dark, but I could make out the outline of the window and the curtains. There was a faint light beyond them. Not strong enough to illuminate the room, just enough that the camera picked it up as a dull, gray-blue shape. I held the phone steady, staring at it. The light outside didn't look like a street light. Wrong color, and it didn't move. I lowered the phone slightly and looked at the actual window. Still dark. No visible light through the curtains. I raised the phone again. The light was still there on the screen. Same position, same faint glow. That didn't make sense. I shifted my angle slightly, tilting the phone. The image adjusted like it should. The light stayed fixed outside. I stood up slowly, still holding the phone, and walked toward the window. The floor felt cold under my feet. The air in the room felt still, like nothing was moving. I stopped about a foot from the window. The camera feed showed the light more clearly now. It wasn't a single point, more like a soft patch hovering just beyond the glass, no clear edges. Just there. I reached out with my free hand and pulled the curtain back slightly. The moment I did, the phone vibrated. A short, low buzz. I froze. The camera image flickered for a split second, then stabilized. The light was still there. I looked past the curtain. Nothing. Just darkness, no glow, no source. I moved the curtain a bit more. Still nothing outside. But on the phone screen, the light remained. Exactly where it had been. My ears started to feel strange. A slight pressure building. I swallowed, but it didn't clear. I stepped back from the window. The phone stayed pointed toward it. The light didn't change. I lowered the phone and turned it slightly away from the window. The light disappeared from the screen immediately. I turned it back. It reappeared. Same position, same faint glow. My chest tightened a bit. I took another step back. The pressure in my ears increased. I could feel it in my jaw now. The phone vibrated again. Longer this time. I almost dropped it. The camera image flickered again, but this time, it distorted. For a split second, the light stretched, not outward, but vertically, like it had depth. Then it snapped back to normal. I stood there, not moving. The phone felt heavier in my hand. Warmer. I checked the time again. Still 2:41. The seconds weren't moving. I stared at it. The numbers stayed frozen. I looked back at the camera feed. The light pulsed, very faint, just a slight increase in brightness, then back to normal. And for a moment, I thought I saw something behind it. Not a shape, more like a shadow moving through it. I blinked. The effect was gone. The phone vibrated again. This time I felt it through my whole hand. A deeper buzz, almost like it was resonating. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough to make me wince. I turned away from the window quickly. The moment I did, the vibration stopped. The pressure dropped. I looked back at the phone. The camera app was still open, but the light was gone. Just a dark image of the curtains. The time ticked forward. 2:42. I stood there for a second, breathing slowly. Everything felt normal again. The air moved slightly. I could hear faint sounds from outside. I turned back to the window and pulled the curtain open fully. Nothing. Just the street outside. Dark, empty. No lights. I went back to bed, still holding the phone. I didn't remember putting it down, but I must have, because the next thing I remember was waking up to my alarm. Morning light coming through the curtains. Everything normal. I sat up and grabbed my phone. Battery was low, lower than it should have been. I checked the camera roll. There were videos, several of them, all recorded between 2:39 and 2:41. I opened the first one. It showed the same view as before, the window, the curtains, dark. Then the image flickered. The light appeared, faint, hovering beyond the glass. The video stuttered, frames dropped, then it cut to static for a second before ending. I opened another, same thing. But in this one, for a brief moment, the distortion was clearer. The light stretched vertically again, and behind it, something moved. Not defined. Just a darker shift within the glow. I scrubbed through the rest. All similar. Short clips, corrupted frames, that same faint light. In the last video, right before it ended, the camera angle changed slightly, as if the phone had tilted. The light moved closer to the center of the frame, and for a single frame, just one, the distortion cleared. The light wasn't just outside the window, it was right up against the glass, almost touching it. Then the video ended. I checked the phone settings, no timers, no scheduled recordings, nothing that would explain it. I went to the window and looked at the glass, clean, no marks, no condensation, nothing. I stood there for a while, trying to piece it together, but the only thing I couldn't explain was how the phone ended up in my hand. Pointed at the window, already recording, before I woke up. I was already awake when it happened. Not fully up, just lying there, that in-between state where you're aware of the room but not really thinking about anything. The sky outside was still dark, just that faint gray hint that morning was coming. I turned onto my side and checked my phone. 5:07. Too early to get up. I set it back down and stared at the window. The curtains were slightly open, just enough to see a slice of the sky beyond the houses across the street. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought it was just the start of sunrise, a faint light creeping in. But it wasn't spread across the horizon like it should have been. It was a line, a narrow vertical strip of brightness cutting upward into the sky. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. The rest of the horizon stayed dark, just that one section glowing. I pushed myself up slightly, resting on one elbow. The line didn't widen, didn't spread sideways, it stayed thin, like a column of light rising straight up. I frowned and sat up properly. The room felt quiet, too quiet. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. Walked closer to the window. The air felt still, no sound from outside, no early morning traffic. Nothing. I pulled the curtain aside a bit more. The line of light was clearer now, still narrow, still perfectly vertical. It extended from just above the rooftops up into the sky, fading slightly as it reached higher. But the base of it, where it met the horizon, was brighter, more defined. I stared at it, trying to understand what I was seeing. It didn't behave like sunlight. There was no gradual spread, no soft glow, just that clean, straight strip. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle, like when you go through a tunnel. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I leaned closer to the glass. The line didn't flicker, didn't move, just held steady. Then it changed, not by spreading, by retracting. The brightness started to pull upward, slowly at first, like the bottom of the line was lifting away from the horizon. I felt my chest tighten slightly, not fear, just confusion. I kept watching. The lower part of the light faded as it moved up. The line became shorter, still vertical, still straight, just shrinking from the bottom. The pressure in my ears increased, a dull, steady weight. I pressed my hand lightly against the window. The glass felt normal, cold. I looked back at the sky. The line continued to retract, higher, higher, until only the upper portion remained, a thin, faint segment against the darker sky. Then it pulled in completely. Gone. No fade, no spread, just gone. The sky returned to its normal dim gray, the kind you expect just before sunrise. I stood there for a second, staring at the empty space, waiting. Nothing came back. The pressure in my ears eased, gradually, until it felt normal again. Then the sounds returned. Faint at first, a car somewhere in the distance, a bird, the usual early morning noise. I checked my phone, no signal. That wasn't unusual for a second or two, but it stood out. I looked at the time, 5:24. That didn't make sense. I was sure I'd only been standing there for a minute, maybe two. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then the signal came back. Full bars. I looked back at the sky. It was starting to brighten normally now, a soft, even glow spreading across the horizon. No lines, no shapes, just the usual sunrise. I stayed there a bit longer, watching. Everything behaved the way it should. The light spread gradually. The sky shifted from gray to pale blue. Nothing unusual. I went and made tea after that. Tried not to think about it too much, but every now and then I'd glance back at the window, half expecting to see that line again, not because it belonged there, but because it had looked too deliberate. Too precise, like it wasn't the sky changing, but something in front of it moving out of the way. I noticed it because my breath shouldn't have been visible. It was warm out. Not hot, but warm enough that I'd been sitting around in just a t-shirt all evening. I was camping in a small patch of woodland just off a trail near Kinder Scout. Nothing too remote, but far enough that once it got dark, it felt properly isolated. I'd set up just before sunset, cooked something simple, sat by a small fire for a bit, then let it die down to embers. By the time I crawled into the tent, the air still felt mild. No chill, no reason for condensation or anything like that. I woke up sometime in the night, not suddenly, just drifted awake. The kind of wake up where nothing's wrong, but you're not asleep anymore either. I was lying on my back, looking up at the inside of the tent. It was quiet. Too quiet. No wind through the trees, no insects. Nothing. I lay there for a minute, listening. Then I exhaled and saw it, a faint cloud in front of my face. I blinked, exhaled again, another one, soft, visible breath, like it was cold. I frowned, pushing myself up onto my elbows. The air didn't feel cold, my skin wasn't reacting. No goosebumps, no chill. But every time I breathed out, I could see it. I reached out slightly, moving my hand through the space. The air felt normal. I sat up fully. The sleeping bag rustled softly. The sound felt muted somehow, like it wasn't carrying properly. I unzipped the tent slowly. The fabric made that low dragging sound. Again, it felt off. Duller than it should have been. I opened the flap and leaned out. The woods were dark. No moon. Just that faint ambient light that lets you see shapes but nothing clearly. I breathed out again. Another cloud, clear as anything. I looked around. The trees stood still. No movement. No sound. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't bright, just a faint flicker. Between the trees, maybe 20 or 30 meters away, at first, I thought it was someone else, another camper. But it didn't behave like a torch or a fire. It flickered irregularly, not steady, not rhythmic, just appearing and fading. I stayed still, watching it. My breath continued to fog in front of me. Each exhale drifting slowly, lingering longer than it should have. I stepped out of the tent. The ground felt normal under my boots, dry, no frost, no damp. I looked down briefly. No mist near the ground, just around my breath. I looked back at the light. It was still there, faint, flickering, not moving, just present. I took a step forward. The leaves crunched slightly underfoot. The sound felt delayed, like it reached me a fraction too late. I stopped. Listened, nothing else. No animals, no wind, just that quiet. I took another step. The light flickered again, slightly brighter this time, then dimmer. I tried to focus on it directly. The moment I did, it seemed to weaken, like it slipped out of clarity. I looked slightly to the side. It became more visible again. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I took another step forward. The breath in front of me grew thicker, more defined, like the air in front of me was colder than the rest. I reached out slowly. The air still felt warm on my skin, but my breath kept fogging. I looked back toward the tent briefly. It looked normal, still, silent. I turned back to the trees. The light flickered again, then shifted, not across the ground, just deeper between the trees, like it had moved back without actually traveling. I stepped forward again. The pressure in my ears started, subtle, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The light flickered faster now, still faint, still not illuminating anything around it, just existing. I took one more step, then stopped. Something about the space ahead felt wrong. Not visually, just the sense of it. Like the distance between me and the trees wasn't consistent. I stood there breathing slowly, watching the light. Then it dimmed. Gradually, the flicker slowed. The brightness dropped until it was barely there, then gone. No fade into darkness, just gone. The woods returned to normal. Shapes, shadows, nothing else. I stood there for a moment, waiting, my breath still visible, still fogging in front of me. Then slowly, it stopped. The clouds grew thinner, fainter, until they were gone. I exhaled again. Nothing. Just normal air. The pressure in my ears eased. The sounds came back, Faint at first, then clearer. Leaves shifting somewhere in the distance. A bird. The usual night noise. I stayed out there for a bit longer, looking at the spot where the light had been. Nothing returned. Eventually, I went back into the tent, zipped it up, lay down again. Everything felt normal. The air, the sounds, the space. But I didn't sleep much after that. Every now and then, I'd exhale slowly, just to check, half expecting to see it again. Like the air in front of me wasn't always the same. I noticed it because the fog didn't look right. It was one of those early morning drives, just before sunrise, when everything's quiet and the roads are empty. I was cutting through farmland to get to a job out near Wilmslow, taking the smaller roads to avoid the motorway. There was fog, but not heavy. Just low, patchy stuff sitting over the fields, drifting slowly across the road in places. My headlights cut through it fine. Nothing unusual at first. I had the radio low, barely paying attention, just following the road. Then I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was headlights from another car somewhere ahead, maybe dipping behind a hill or something. But it wasn't above the fog, it was under it. A soft light spreading across the ground beneath the mist. Not bright, just enough to make the fog look like it was lit from below. I slowed down slightly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. There were no buildings nearby, no houses, just open fields on both sides. The glow moved, slowly, but not with the fog. The fog was drifting left, pushed by a light breeze. The glow moved right, against it. I frowned, leaning forward slightly. The light didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, just glided under the fog like something moving beneath a surface. I eased off the accelerator, the car slowed, the headlights stretched further ahead. The glow became clearer. It wasn't a single point, more like a patch. Diffuse, soft-edged, but distinct from the darkness around it. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air came in, damp, quiet, no sound, no engine, no hum, nothing. The glow kept moving. Still against the direction of the fog, I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. Empty road. I looked ahead again. The glow had shifted further across the field. Keeping a steady pace, I tapped the brake lightly. The car slowed to maybe 30. The glow didn't react, didn't change speed, just kept moving. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I kept watching it, trying to match it to something real. Vehicle lights, machinery, anything. But there was nothing, no shapes, no silhouettes, just that soft light beneath the fog. Then it changed direction, not gradually, it just turned. The movement shifted from right to left, still under the fog, still smooth, still silent. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle, like when you're driving up a hill. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I slowed down more, the car almost coasting now. The glow moved closer to the road, not directly toward me, just drifting in that direction. I gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter, watching it. The fog above it thickened slightly, or maybe it just looked that way because of the light. I couldn't tell. The pressure in my ears increased, a dull, steady weight. I checked my phone quickly. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back at the field. The glow was closer now. Still no shape, still no source, just that light, moving. Then it stopped, right near the edge of the field, close to the road. I slowed to a near stop. The headlights illuminated the grass ahead, but the glow didn't reflect off anything. It didn't brighten the ground. It just existed beneath the fog. Separate. I stared at it, trying to force my eyes to see something more. Anything. Then it shifted again. Not across the field. Up. Not into the sky. Just up into the fog. The light rose slightly. The fog above it lit up for a moment. Then the glow faded, not quickly, just gradually, like it was being dimmed. The pressure in my ears eased, slowly. The fog returned to its normal dull gray. No light beneath it. Nothing moving. I sat there for a few seconds. Engine idling. Listening. The world felt quiet again. Normal. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only slowed down for a minute. Maybe 2. The clock said nearly 15 had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back at the field. Nothing. Just fog. Drifting with the wind. I pulled the car forward slowly. Drove past the spot. The headlights lit the ground normally. No glow, no movement, just empty field. But the way the light had moved, not with the fog, not with anything visible, felt less like something on the ground and more like something just beneath where I could see. I used to cut across the school field on my way home from late shifts. It saved maybe 10 minutes compared to sticking to the roads, and after a while, you stop thinking about how empty it is at night. It was a secondary school, big open playing field with a fence around most of it, but there's a gap near the corner where people have pushed through over the years. That's where I always went in. That night it was dry, cold, and completely still. No wind, no rain, just that quiet you get when everything's settled. It was a little after midnight. The houses around the field had their lights off for the most part, and the school building itself was dark. I climbed through the gap in the fence and stepped onto the grass. It felt normal underfoot. Slightly damp, but nothing unusual. I had my phone in my pocket, no music, just walking. You could hear the faint sound of the main road in the distance, but it was far enough away that it didn't carry much. I'd crossed that field dozens of times. There's a worn path that cuts diagonally from one corner to the opposite side. I stuck to that, more out of habit than anything. About halfway across, I noticed the light. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint change in how the grass looked ahead of me. A patch that seemed slightly brighter than the rest. I slowed down. At first, I thought maybe it was a security light from the school building hitting at a weird angle. But when I looked toward the building, everything there was dark. I kept walking. As I got closer, the light became clearer. It was a wide patch, maybe 10 or 12 feet across, sitting right over the grass. Pale, almost white, but soft. Not harsh or focused like a spotlight. The edges weren't sharp, they just faded into the surrounding darkness. I stopped a few steps away from it. The rest of the field looked normal. Dark, flat, empty. This one patch looked like it was being lit from above. I glanced up. Nothing. Just the sky. Clouded over, no stars visible, no streetlights nearby that could have reached that far. I took a step closer. The grass inside the light looked slightly different. Not in color, just in texture, like it was being pressed down gently, even though there was no wind. I stepped into it. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It was warmer. Not by a lot, but enough that it stood out against the cold air around it, like stepping into a room that's been heated slightly. I paused. My breath didn't show as much in front of me. The air felt thicker, not hard to breathe, just different. I took another step further in. The light didn't change. It stayed steady, evenly covering the ground. I held my hands out slightly, more out of instinct than anything. That's when I felt it, a faint tingling. At first, I thought it was just from the cold, like when your fingers start to warm up again, but it wasn't quite that. It was more even, running across my fingertips, then up into my palms. I rubbed my hands together. The feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. I looked down at the grass. For a second, I thought I saw something shift beneath it. Not moving, just deeper. Like the surface wasn't solid in the way it should have been. I blinked. It looked normal again. The tingling spread slightly up my wrists, not painful, just enough to make me aware of it. The air around me felt heavier. My ears popped, sharp. I swallowed, but the pressure lingered. The rest of the field had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed when it happened, but now it was obvious. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Just me standing in that patch of light. I took a step back. The moment I crossed the edge, the temperature dropped again. The cold air hit me properly. The tingling in my hands didn't stop, but it eased slightly. I turned around and looked at the patch. It was still there, unchanged, sitting in the middle of the field like it didn't belong. Belong. For a second, I thought about stepping back in just to see if anything else would happen, but something in me said not to. I stayed where I was. The light pulsed once, subtle, barely noticeable, but enough. My ears popped again. The pressure returned for a second, then faded. I took another step back, then another. I kept my eyes on it as I moved toward the far side of the field. The patch stayed where it was. No movement, no change, just that steady glow. I didn't turn my back on it until I reached the fence on the other side. I climbed through and stepped onto the pavement. When I looked back, the field was dark, no light, no patch, just empty grass. I stood there for a second, trying to adjust to the normal darkness. The sounds came back gradually. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere, the usual background noise. I checked my phone, 12:48. I frowned. I'd entered the field around 12:15. It shouldn't have taken more than 10 minutes to cross. Even stopping, it didn't feel like more than a few minutes. I walked the rest of the way home, rubbing my hands together. The tingling stayed for a while, faded slowly like it was working its way out rather than stopping all at once. When I got home, I went straight to the sink and ran my hands under warm water. They looked normal. No marks, no redness, just normal. But the feeling lingered faintly for the rest of the night. The next day, I passed the field again in daylight. Nothing there, just grass. Flat, slightly worn where people walk across it. No sign of anything unusual. I still cut across sometimes, but I don't walk through the middle anymore. I stay closer to the edge. And if I see anything on the ground that looks even slightly out of place, I go around it. I usually walk my dog around the same time every night, somewhere between 9:30 and 10. Her name's Marnie, medium-sized mutt, part collie I think, smart enough to know the route better than I do. We live in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Dayton. Rows of houses, small backyards, and just enough streetlights to keep things visible but still dark between them. That night was late November. Cold, but not snowing yet. The air had that dry bite to it, and you could see your breath if you looked for it. It had been cloudy earlier, but by the time I stepped outside, the sky had cleared up. No wind, no traffic, just that low hum you get from distant highways if you really listen. Marnie was already waiting by the door when I grabbed her leash. She always knew when it was time. I clipped it on, zipped up my jacket, and we stepped out. The first part of the walk was normal. We went down our street, turned left past the Simmons' house, the one with the always-on porch light, and headed toward the back loop. Marnie did her usual thing, stopping every few feet to sniff the same patches of grass like they were new. I checked my phone once as we turned the corner, 9:42. Everything felt routine. Quiet, but in a normal way. About 5 minutes later, as we passed a row of single-story houses with low roofs and bare trees out front, Marnie stopped walking. Not a pause, not a sniff and think. She just froze. Her ears went up, body stiff, leash pulling tight in my hand. I figured she'd spotted a cat or something, so I followed her line of sight. She wasn't looking at the ground. She was looking up. That's when I saw it. A pale light drifting above of the rooftops. It wasn't high, maybe just above the houses, gliding slowly from right to left. It didn't blink, no red or green like a plane, no sound at all, just a soft white glow moving steadily like it was following the line of the street. I squinted, trying to make out a shape. There wasn't one I could see, just the light itself, like a foggy bulb floating through the air. My first thought was drone, someone flying one of those quiet ones. But even those make a faint buzz, especially at night when everything else is still. This didn't. Marnie let out a low whine. I hadn't heard her make that sound before. Not like that. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with something urgent. She shifted her weight, paws scraping slightly on the pavement, but she didn't move forward or back. "Hey," I said, gently tugging the leash. "Come on." She didn't budge. Her eyes stayed locked on the light. I followed it again. It hadn't changed speed. Still gliding slowly, smooth, like it wasn't affected by anything around it. Then the air changed. I didn't notice it right away. It was more like something I felt before I realized it. The quiet got heavier. Not silent, just muted. Like someone had turned the volume down on everything at once. The distant highway hum was gone. Even my own footsteps sounded dull. I swallowed and felt my ears pop slightly. Not painful, just enough to notice. Like when you go up a hill too fast. Marnie's whine got sharper. Then she pulled. Hard. Not toward the light, away from it. Back the way we'd come. The leash snapped tight, and she dug her paws in for a second, then yanked again, this time almost pulling me off balance. Okay, I said, more to myself than her. I turned with her, giving in, and she immediately started moving fast. Almost a trot, then faster. Not running, but determined. Head low now, ears still back, glancing up only for a second before focusing straight ahead. I looked back once. The light was still there. Same height, same speed. It hadn't reacted to us at all. It just kept drifting above the houses like it had its own path. I kept walking. We didn't stop at any of the usual spots. Marnie didn't sniff anything. She didn't hesitate at corners. She just pulled steady and strong, straight back toward our street. The quiet stayed with us for a while. I could feel it more than hear it. That slight pressure in my ears, like the air wasn't moving the way it should. Then, maybe halfway back, everything returned. The highway hum faded in. A car passed somewhere a block away. A dog barked in the distance. The normal night sounds. Marnie slowed down a little, but she didn't relax. Not until we were almost at the house. I unlocked the door and she went straight inside without looking back. No circling, no hesitation, just in. I stepped in after her, shut the door, and leaned against it for a second. The house felt normal, warm, quiet in the usual way. I checked my phone, 10:38. I stared at it, thinking maybe I'd misread it before, but I remembered checking it at 9:42. That walk usually took 20, maybe 25 minutes if she was being slow. This had taken almost an hour. I tried to think back through it, leaving the house, turning left, seeing the light, Marnie freezing, walking back. There was no gap, no point where I felt like I'd lost time. It all felt continuous. But the clock didn't match. I went to the window and looked out toward the street. Nothing there, no light, just the same row of houses, porch lights on, shadows in between. Marnie was lying by the door, not sleeping, just watching it. I didn't walk her that late again for a while. Started going earlier, before it got fully dark. Every now and then, though, when I take her out at night, she'll stop and look up at the rooftops again. And I always follow her gaze. The taxi dropped me off just after 1 a.m. I remember checking the time as I got out, 1:12. The street was quiet, the kind of still you only get that late when everything's shut down and even the usual background noise feels distant. It had been a cold night, dry, with a slight bite in the air. My breath showed faintly as I stepped onto the pavement. The driver gave a quick nod through the mirror. I said thanks, shut the door, and watched him pull away. Nothing unusual. The car rolled down the street, taillights shrinking as it turned the corner at the far end. I stood there for a second, adjusting my jacket, digging in my pocket for my keys. That's when I noticed the light. It was in the middle of the street, right about where the taxi had just been, low, hovering maybe 3 or 4 feet above the road. At first, I thought it might be some kind of reflection from a passing car or a streetlight catching something at an angle. But there were no cars, and the streetlights weren't positioned in a way that would create that kind of glow. It was soft, white, not bright enough to light up the whole area, but clear enough that it stood out against the dark pavement. I froze, keys still in my hand. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. It just hung there. I took a step forward, squinting slightly. There was no visible source, no object I could make out inside it, just the glow itself. The air smelled off, faintly metallic, like when you walk past electrical equipment or after a storm, that kind of sharp, clean smell. I noticed it as I breathed in, subtle at first, then more obvious the longer I stood there. I looked up and down the street. No one else around, no windows lighting up, no movement anywhere. I took another step toward the light. The sound of my shoes on the pavement felt muted, like it wasn't carrying the way it should. The usual distant noise, cars, wind was gone. Just quiet. The light pulsed once. Soft. I felt it more than saw it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a quick change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The pressure lingered. I shifted my weight. My fingers tingled slightly where I was holding my keys. I looked down at them for a second, then back at the light. It seemed closer now. Not physically closer, but more present, like it had taken up more space in my attention. I took another step forward. The air felt heavier. Not enough to stop me moving, just enough to notice. The light didn't react. It stayed steady. I tried to see if it was reflecting off the pavement. It wasn't. The ground beneath it looked flat, too flat, like the texture of the asphalt had been smoothed out. I crouched slightly, trying to get a better angle. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it, not a shape, just a darker area, like something was passing behind the glow. Then it was gone. The light returned to being uniform. My chest tightened. Not panic, just pressure. I took a breath. It felt shallow, like I couldn't quite fill my lungs all the way. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced slightly. The light pulsed again, stronger. The pressure in my chest spiked. I straightened up, instinctively taking a step back. My movements felt delayed, like there was a fraction of a second between deciding to move and actually doing it. I blinked. The light flickered. Once. Then it was gone. just gone. No fade, no movement. The street was empty again, dark, normal. The sound came back all at once, a car passing somewhere in the distance, a faint breeze moving through the trees, my own breathing louder than before. I stood there for a second, trying to catch up. The metallic smell lingered faintly, then faded. I looked down at the spot where the light had been. The pavement looked the same as the rest of the street. No mark. No sign anything had been there. I checked my phone. The screen lit up. 1:48. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I'd only been standing there for a minute or two. It hadn't felt like more than that. I unlocked the phone and opened the ride app. The trip wasn't there. No recent rides, no record of the pickup or drop-off. I stared at the screen. I refreshed it, closed the app, opened it again. Still nothing. I checked my messages. No receipt, no notification, nothing to show I'd just been in a taxi. I looked back down the street. Empty. The corner where the car had turned was quiet. No sign it had ever been there. I stood there for another minute, trying to piece it together. Then I walked to my door, unlocked it, and went inside. The house felt normal, warm, quiet. I set my keys down and checked my phone again. 1:49. The time moved forward normally. But the gap between when I got out of the car and when I checked the time didn't make sense, and the ride, it was just gone. Now, whenever I get dropped off late at night, I stay on the step a little longer before going inside, just to make sure the street behind me stays empty after the car leaves. I was out in the garage working on a small engine when it happened. Nothing complicated, just cleaning up a carburetor off an old mower I'd been meaning to fix. It was late, maybe just after 11. The house was quiet, everyone else asleep. The garage is detached, a few steps across the driveway from the back door. It's got those long fluorescent strip lights overhead, the kind that buzz faintly even when they're working properly. I had both of them on, along with a small desk lamp on the workbench. Everything felt normal. The air was a little cold, but not uncomfortable. I had the side door cracked open just enough to let in some fresh air. You could hear the usual night sounds, distant cars, a dog barking somewhere far off, the occasional wind brushing against the fence. I was standing at the bench, tools laid out in front of me, when the lights dimmed. Not flickered. Dimmed, like someone had turned a dial down slowly. I looked up. The fluorescent tubes overhead dropped to a dull, grayish glow. The desk lamp dimmed with them. The hum from the lights deepened slightly, like the pitch had shifted. I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. For a second, I thought maybe the power was about to go out. But instead of cutting completely, the lights held at that low level. Then they started to brighten again, slowly, but not normally. The brightness didn't feel right. It got stronger than it should have been. The white from the tubes became harsh, almost flat, like it wasn't spreading properly. The shadows on the walls sharpened in a way that didn't match the angle of the lights. I frowned and looked around. The tools hanging on the wall, wrenches, screwdrivers, cast long, thin shadows that didn't quite line up with where the light was coming from. Then I felt it, a low hum. Not from the lights, from everywhere. At first, it was faint, just enough that I thought it might be coming from outside. Maybe a distant engine or something passing on the road. But it built quickly, steady, deep. It vibrated through the floor up into my feet. I shifted my weight. The feeling stayed. The tools on the wall started to move slightly, not swinging, just trembling. You could hear a faint metallic chatter as they touched against each other. I stepped back from the bench. The hum got stronger. It wasn't loud, just present, like it was inside the air itself. My ears popped. Sharp. I winced and swallowed. Trying to clear it. The pressure stayed, the air felt heavier. Breathing took a bit more effort. I looked toward the open side door. The darkness outside looked normal. No light, no movement. But the sound from outside had dropped away. No cars, no wind, nothing. Just the hum. I took a step toward the door. The vibration in the floor intensified slightly with each step. I stopped halfway. The lights overhead pulsed, not flickered. Pulsed. Bright. Dim. Bright. In a slow, steady rhythm. My chest felt tight. Not panic, just pressure. I held my hands out slightly in front of me. They were tingling. Faint at first, then more noticeable. Like pins and needles, but smoother. The hum deepened. For a second, I thought I could feel it in my teeth. I looked back at the tools. The slight trembling had become more pronounced. Still not swinging, but enough that you could clearly see movement. The shadows on the wall shifted with the pulsing light. I blinked. The edges of things looked off. Not blurred, just less solid, like the outlines of objects weren't quite fixed. The hum peaked, and then it stopped, instantly. The light snapped back to normal brightness. The tools went still. The air felt light again. The usual night sounds rushed back in all at once. Distant traffic, wind against the fence, everything. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to catch up. The garage looked exactly the same as it had before. Workbench, tools, nothing out of place. I took a breath. It felt normal. No pressure, no heaviness. I looked down at my watch. It was an old analog one I wear out of habit. The second hand was ticking, steady, normal, but the time was off. I frowned. I checked the clock on the wall above the bench. Then my phone. All three didn't match. The wall clock and my phone said 11:52. My watch said 11:27, exactly 25 minutes behind. I stared at it. The second hand kept moving. No pause, no stutter. Just ticking forward like nothing had happened. I turned my wrist slightly, watching it, waiting for it to jump or correct itself. It didn't. It just kept going. I looked around the garage again. Everything was still, quiet, normal. I walked over to the wall clock and tapped it lightly. It didn't change. I checked my phone again. Still 11:52. I stood there for a while, trying to think back. The moment the lights dimmed. The hum building. The pulsing. It hadn't felt like 25 minutes. It had felt like a few minutes at most. Maybe less. I went back to the bench and sat down. My hands still had a faint tingling in them. Not strong, just enough to notice. I didn't finish the repair that night. I turned off the lights and went back inside. The house felt normal, warm, quiet. But I kept looking at my watch, watching the second hand move, counting. It never caught up. It stayed 25 minutes behind. I reset it the next morning. But now, whenever I'm in the garage late and the lights even flicker a little, I stop what I'm doing and I listen, just in case that hum comes back. I noticed it because of the reflection. I was driving back from a late shift somewhere between Buxton and Macclesfield on one of those long, empty roads that cut through open land. No houses, no streetlights, just fields and the occasional stone wall. It was just after 2 a.m., cold, clear night. No clouds. My headlights were the only light on the road. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes, just zoning out a bit, when something flashed above me, not in front. Above. It was quick, just a flicker, like when light hits something reflective at the right angle. I glanced up instinctively, but there was nothing there. I slowed slightly, scanning the road ahead. Probably a bird, I said out loud, even though it didn't sound right. There wasn't any movement after that. I kept driving. A minute or so later, it happened again. Same thing. A sharp reflection, like my headlights had caught something metallic. I looked up immediately this time, and I saw it for maybe a second. Something high above the road, not directly overhead, but slightly ahead of me. It wasn't clear. Just a shape. Flat, maybe. Hard to tell. But it caught the light again as it tilted slightly. That's the part I remember clearly. It tilted, like something adjusting its angle. Then it vanished. Not moved off, not drifted away. It just went up, fast. Straight up, out of sight in a fraction of a second. I hit the brake without thinking. The car slowed hard, tires crunching slightly on the rough surface. I pulled over to the side of the road and just sat there, engine running, lights still on. I stared up through the windshield. Nothing, just a clear sky. Stars, no movement. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence made everything feel sharper. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold. Still, no wind. I walked a few steps away from the car, looking straight up. Nothing, no sound, no sign of anything. I turned slowly, scanning the sky in all directions. Completely empty. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. I'd seen the reflection twice. Seen it tilt, seen it go. I got back in the car and started the engine again. The headlights came back on, cutting into the road ahead. I hesitated for a second, then pulled back onto the road. I drove slower now, eyes flicking up every few seconds. Nothing happened. A few minutes passed. Then I noticed something else. The road ahead looked slightly off. Not in a clear way, just darker than it should have been. Like the headlights weren't reaching as far. I checked my lights. They were on full beam. I flicked them off and on again. No change. The beam still seemed shorter than usual. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see further. The edges of the road faded into darkness sooner than they should have. The fields on either side looked flat, like they weren't reflecting any light. I swallowed, gripping the wheel tighter. "Just keep driving," I said quietly. I kept my eyes on the road. Didn't look up again. After a while, I started to hear something. A faint sound. Low. Not quite a hum. More like pressure in my ears. Subtle, but there. I shook my head slightly, trying to clear it. The sound didn't change. It didn't come from any direction. Just sat there, under everything. I pressed the accelerator a bit more. The car picked up speed. The sound stayed the same. Then, without warning, the headlights flared brighter. Not by much. Just enough to notice. And in that moment, I saw it again. Directly above me, this time. Closer. Much closer. A shape. Flat. Wide. It caught the light for a split second. Metallic. Not shiny, but reflective in a dull way, like brushed metal. I couldn't make out any detail beyond that. No edges, no markings, just the surface. It tilted slightly, same as before. And then, gone. Upward, instant. I slammed the brake. The car skidded slightly before stopping. My heart was pounding now. I looked up through the windshield. Nothing. I threw the door open and got out again. Looked straight up. Empty sky. No sound. No movement. The ringing in my ears faded slowly. I stood there, breathing hard, trying to steady myself. After a minute or two, I got back in the car. I didn't want to stay there. I started the engine again. The headlights came on. Normal brightness. This for normal range. The road ahead looked right again. I pulled back onto the road and drove. Didn't stop this time. Didn't slow down. Just kept going until I reached a more populated area. Streetlights. Houses. Something normal. When I finally got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute before getting out. I didn't look up. I just went inside. The next morning, I went back out to the car. I don't know what I expected to find, but when I looked at the roof, I noticed something. A faint mark, not a dent, not a scratch, just a slightly different texture in the paint, oval-shaped, about the size of a dinner plate. Right in the center. I only noticed it because my dog wouldn't settle. It was around 3 a.m., maybe a bit after. I live in a small detached house on the edge of a village near Shrewsbury. Not much around except fields and a couple of other houses spaced out along the lane. My dog, Marley, usually sleeps through the night without moving. But that night he kept shifting, getting up, walking to the back door, then coming back. I checked the time on my phone, 3:12. "All right, what is it?" I said, sitting up. He didn't bark, just stood there, ears forward, staring toward the kitchen. I got up, pulled on a hoodie, and followed him downstairs. The house was quiet. No sounds from outside, no wind, nothing. The kind of silence that makes small noises stand out more than they should. Marley went straight to the back door and stood there, stiff. I flicked the light on. Nothing unusual. Garden looked the same as always. Fence, shed, patch of grass, the line of trees at the back. I waited a minute, watching. Marley didn't relax. Eventually, I let him out. He stepped outside slowly, not like he usually does. Normally, he bolts out, runs straight to the far corner. This time he stayed close to the door, sniffing the air more than the ground. I stood there, holding the door open, watching him. After a few seconds, he looked up. Not at me, past me, like he was tracking something above the house. I turned slightly, following his line of sight, but there was nothing there, just darkness. "Come on," I said, trying to sound normal. He didn't move. I stepped outside onto the patio. The air felt colder than it should have been. Not freezing, just sharp. I looked around again. Nothing. No lights, no movement, no sound. Marley suddenly backed up and pressed against my leg. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, almost like static, not coming from any direction in particular, just there. I held my breath, trying to isolate it. It stayed constant. Then it stopped. Just cut out. Marley turned and went straight back inside. I followed, shutting the door behind me. He went upstairs immediately and curled up on the bed like he wanted to be as far from the ground floor as possible. I stayed up for a bit, sitting on the edge of the bed, listening. Everything was quiet again. Eventually, I lay back down. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was my alarm going off at 7. Everything felt normal. Marley was fine, acting like nothing had happened. I went through the usual routine, coffee, shower, getting ready for work. It wasn't until I got a notification on my phone that I thought about it again. Motion detected, backyard camera. Time 03:18 a.m. I frowned. That would have been right after I went back to bed. I opened the app. The clip was already there, saved automatically. I hesitated for a second, then played it. The camera angle showed the whole garden, same as I'd seen it earlier. For the first few seconds, nothing happened, just an empty garden. Then, without warning, the entire image washed out. Bright white, not like a light turning on. It was instant. One frame normal, next frame completely overexposed. I leaned closer to the screen. There was no detail at all, just white. It lasted for a few seconds, then it snapped back to normal. Same garden, same angle, nothing out of place. I replayed it. Same thing, normal. Flash, normal. I noticed the timestamp in the corner. It read 3:18:22 at the last normal frame before the flash. Then, when the image came back, it read through 29. 7 seconds missing. I scrubbed through the clip, frame by frame. There were no frames showing anything in between, just a jump. I sat there for a while, watching it over and over, trying to see if there was any shape in the white, any shadow, anything, like there wasn't, just blank. I checked the rest of the recordings from that night. Nothing else triggered. No movement before, no movement after, just that one clip. I zoomed in on different parts of the frame. Fence, shed, grass. Everything looked normal once the image came back. No scorch marks, no damage, nothing. I went outside to check anyway. The garden looked the same as always, but when I walked toward the center of the lawn, I noticed something. The grass felt off, not wet, not dry, just slightly flattened in a circular patch. It wasn't obvious unless you were standing right on it. I looked around for anything else. There were 2 more patches, all roughly the same size, spread out across the garden. I stood there for a minute, trying to match their positions to the camera angle in my head. They lined up roughly with where the brightest part of the flash had been. I went back inside and watched the clip again. This time, I paid attention to the edges. Just before the flash, there was a faint flicker along the top of the frame. Barely noticeable, like something passing just out of view. I paused it, zoomed in. It didn't look like anything clear, just a distortion. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Marley came into the room and sat next to me. He didn't look at the screen. He looked toward the back door. I checked the time on the recording again, and 3:18. That would have been a few minutes after I went upstairs. I tried to remember if I'd heard anything else. Any sound, any light through the curtains. Nothing, just that faint static earlier. I left the app open and went about my day. But later that evening, when it got dark again, I checked the camera feed. Everything looked normal. Same view, same lighting. I watched it for a few minutes. Nothing happened. Then, for a split second, the image dimmed. Not a full flash this time, just a slight drop in brightness. And in that moment, I thought I saw something at the top edge of the frame. Not a shape exactly, more like a darker area against the sky. It was gone almost immediately. The image returned to normal. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Marley stayed close to me the rest of the night. He didn't go near the back door again. I felt it through the seat before I heard anything. Just a quick vibration, like someone had tapped the underside of the car. Not hard, not enough to jolt me, just enough that I noticed it. I looked up from my phone straight away. The engine was off. Keys out. I'd been parked there for a while. I was in a small lay-by just outside Aberystwyth, overlooking the coast. It was late, around midnight, and I'd pulled over after a long drive because I was too tired to keep going. There were no other cars around, no houses nearby, just the road, a low stone wall, and the drop down toward the water somewhere out in the dark. I sat still, listening. Nothing. No follow-up sound. No engine noise, no footsteps, no wind. Just the quiet. I shifted slightly in the seat. No vibration this time. Probably nothing, I said under my breath. I went back to my phone for a second, then paused. Something felt off. I glanced up at the rearview mirror. There was a faint glow, not bright, just enough to notice. It wasn't lighting anything up in car, it just sat there in the mirror. Sat there in the mirror, like a dull patch of light in the reflection. I frowned and leaned forward slightly, trying to get a back window looked normal beyond it. Dark, empty. The glow didn't seem to be coming from outside, in a normal way. It wasn't like headlights. It didn't flare or reflect properly. It just stayed. I twisted slightly in my seat and looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Just darkness. I turned back to the mirror. The glow was still there. Same position, same faint intensity. I reached up and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow moved with it, stayed centered in the reflection. That's when I felt the vibration again, stronger this time. A short, low tremor through the seat and the floor, like the car had briefly settled on something. I froze. The glow in the mirror flickered. Not like a light turning on and off, more like it shifted, changed shape slightly, then held again. My chest tightened. I put my phone down on the passenger seat. The silence outside felt heavier now. I listened carefully. Still nothing. No engine, no